Chapter 51. Veyron climbed into the compact Triton submersible. The vessel hummed to life, and Veyron expertly maneuvered it toward the damaged cargo ship. The submersible's powerful lights lit up the murky depths as he approached the gaping maw in the ship's side. Veyron eased the Triton into position, skillfully wedging the vessel into the breach, temporarily stemming the flow of water into the cargo ship. The divers, carrying deflated industrial ballast bags, then entered the wreckage from inside the hull. Working in tandem, the divers secured the bags around the edges of the hole, making sure they were perfectly positioned to fill the gap between the submersible and the hull once inflated. With a series of hand signals, they communicated with each other and with Veyron, who watched intently from inside the Triton. Once the bags were in place, the divers activated their inflation devices. The bags began to expand, gradually filling the void left by the submersible as it pulled away from the damaged hull. The bags formed a tight seal, effectively stopping the flow of water into the cargo ship. With the ballast bags in position, the large pumping ship moved in, its powerful pumps and hoses ready to extract the seawater from the compromised hull. The crew worked quickly, securing the hoses to the ship and starting the pumps. The sound of powerful machinery filled the air as they began the laborious process of draining water from the cargo ship's interior. There were some minor leaks, as was to be expected, but on the whole his simple plan had worked beautifully. His sub settled, then remained perfectly still. It would remain that way until the Trident rose to the surface. Veyron picked up a good book. It was a new Harlan Coben book called I Will Find You. He adjusted his chair so that he was laying nearly horizontal, opened the first page, and began to read. Chapter 52. Sahara Desert, somewhere on the border of Sudan and Chad. Sam knew that camels walk in a rocking motion known as pacing. This is where the front and back legs on the same side each move forward at the same time. Although Sam had ridden camels before, he couldn't help but feel uncomfortable atop the swaying animal. He preferred the erratic motion of the waves on the ocean. Not many people know that there are 3 separate species of camel. The Arabian camel, also known as a dromedary, has 1 hump and makes up 94% of the world's camel population. The 2-humped Bactrian camel makes up 6%. The wild Bactrian camel is critically endangered. Sam paced along, third in line, sitting astride his 1-humped camel. He traveled with Bakit and his father, a tall, weathered man with a quiet, commanding presence. Sam could only admire the ease with which Bakit and his father navigated the ever-shifting sands. They rationed their water carefully, knowing that the desert was unforgiving to those who didn't respect its perils. The heat was relentless. They often found themselves thirsty, but they had to conserve their resources. As the days passed, the 3 companions steadily moved closer to their quarry. Each day, Bakit's father would examine the tracks left behind by the men who stole the golem and estimate their progress. 1 or more of them had killed his friend, and the people Xavier had been working with. Knowing this, they followed discreetly. What they were doing was dangerous, yet it was the only way Sam could find those responsible and recover the artifact. "We are coming closer, Mr. Riley," Bakit said. "My father can tell by their camel prints that the animals are starting to tire." "Very good," Sam replied. They pressed on. The sun was blazing overhead, and the wind whipped sand into their faces. As they continued their journey through the unforgiving Sahara, the vast sea of sand stretched out in every direction. Sam's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of the men they were pursuing or the landmarks they sought. The camels plodded along, their hooves sinking into the warm sand with each step. Sam's camel, a sturdy beast named Akela, was a reliable companion. She followed Bakit and his father's camels, each adorned with colorful woven blankets and tassels, swaying gently with the rhythm of their gait. Despite the arduous journey, the group maintained a steady pace. Sam was grateful for the expertise of his guides, who easily navigated the endless sea of sand. Bakit's father was a seasoned traveler of the desert. His sun-worn face and calloused hands were proof of the years he had spent traversing the harsh terrain. As they journeyed deeper into the desert, the temperature dropped dramatically, and the group was enveloped in the chilly embrace of the night. Sam and his guides dismounted their camels and huddled together around a small fire they had built, sharing stories and laughter to pass the time. Bakit regaled Sam with tales of the desert, the ancient caravans that had crossed these sands, and the legends of the nomadic tribes that had roamed the area for centuries. With the first light of dawn, the group continued their journey, leaving behind only the remnants of their fire and the fleeting impressions of their footprints in the sand. The desert was an ever-changing landscape, indifferent to their presence. Sam and his new friends forged ahead, driven by the spirit of adventure and the camaraderie that had formed between them. Sam gazed out at the horizon, perched atop a camel on a sweeping sand dune. The sweltering heat radiated around him, but his eyes were drawn to the shimmering expanse of water that lay before him. It was Lake Yoa, a breathtaking oasis, one of the stunning lakes that made up the Onyanga Sarir, amid the unforgiving desert. As he peered at the lake, its gentle ripples seemed to dance in the sunlight, creating a mesmerizing sight that was a stark contrast to the surrounding arid landscape. The water shone like precious gems, gleaming brilliantly against the golden sands. Sam marveled at the vivid contrast of colors between the azure lake and the yellow dunes. Closer to the lake, he spotted a diverse array of flora and fauna that had congregated near this life-giving source. Birds fluttered around the water's edge, sipping from the cool, refreshing liquid, while small mammals scurried under the shade of the sparse vegetation. Sam wanted to dive right in. Instead, he checked his GPS tracker. Somewhere in that tiny oasis was the man responsible for the professor's murder. Sam set his jaw with a determined scowl. The relic hunter was going to curse the day he went after his friend. Chapter 53. Trident GS, 13 Days Out. Tom stood on the bridge of the Trident. It would operate as the command center from which to orchestrate the complex operation of refloating the cargo vessel. Alongside him were James Riley, Captain Trent Higgins, Alyssa Atsopardi, Ibrahim Gamal, Harrison Corbin, Oliver Rodriguez, and Mustafa Ali, an official from the Suez Canal Authority, who had been sent over to liaise and ensure global shipping were doing everything conceivable to remove its stricken cargo ship from where it was blocking all traffic from the canal. Every face held a mixture of deep concentration, concern, and hope. Today was the day of the king tide, the highest tide of the year, providing the best opportunity to dislodge the stranded behemoth. The plan was ambitious. Firefighting boats had used their pumps to drain the seawater from the ship's hold. The open gash had been blocked by a Triton submersible, in which Veyron was still happily imprisoned, while a large set of pulleys attached to an old concrete bunker from the Suez Crisis on the western bank would pull the ship free. Once afloat, a team of tugboats would work in unison to move the Trident, towing it to Port Taufik for the removal of its cargo and necessary repairs. The clock struck 11 a.m. the highest point of the king tide. The ship, now lighter, began to shift slightly. On the western bank, the pulleys had been meticulously set up, their heavy-duty cables secured to the Trident's hull. The powerful winches began to turn, the tension in the cables increasing as they strained to pull the colossal ship free from its earthen grip. Tom watched intently, his hands gripping the railing of the bridge, waiting for the moment of truth. The cables went taut. Nothing happened at first. Then slowly, inch by inch, the Trident was dragged free. Small detonators dug into the sand surrounding the cargo ship incrementally went off, one by one. Their explosions caused a rippling effect that broke the surface tension that held the ship's hull glued to the sand. These explosions, tiny upon the seabed, created expanding pockets of air. These grew as the pressure decreased. In fact, they doubled in size every 33 feet. When they reached the surface, the water looked like a bubbling cauldron. The winches whirred, and the tension broke. Like catching a giant wave, the Trident shifted from its earthly confines. Tugboats, their towing cables already attached to the back of the ship, began to pull the stern into the middle of the Suez Canal. It was slow at first, moving at speeds almost imperceptible with the naked eye. Then, all at once, the stern swung free. Abruptly, the Trident's bow pulled away from the eastern bank. A cheer erupted from the crew. Tom allowed himself a relieved smile, knowing that the most challenging part of the operation was now behind them. With the Trident afloat, the vast team of tugboats sprang into action. They carefully maneuvered around the massive vessel, their powerful engines churning the water as they jockeyed for position. Under Tom's watchful eye, the crew of each tugboat carefully adjusted their towing cables. The tension in their lines signified the transfer of control from the grounded ship to the powerful tugs. Working together with expert precision, the tugboats began to guide the Trident through the narrow confines of the Suez Canal. The operation was slow and methodical, each tugboat straining against its cable, their combined efforts gradually moving the massive ship toward its destination. Every tugboat captain communicated constantly with the others. The result was that they worked in synchronized unison. As the sun began to set, the operation neared its conclusion. The flotilla of tugboats successfully delivered the Trident to Port Tawfik, where it would undergo cargo removal. At Rayron's suggestion, several tons of concrete were to be pumped into the empty watertight compartment which the Triton submersible was currently occupying. It would be a short-term solution, but it would hopefully free the sub to be released. It would also keep the Trident afloat until its cargo was removed, and it was towed to a shipyard large enough to make its final repairs. Tom surveyed the scene, a sense of satisfaction washing over him as he realized that their team had achieved what many had thought to be impossible. The Suez Canal was now free and open. The world could once again rely on this vital artery of global commerce. Tom grinned as he watched the Trident being tied up alongside the port of Tawfik. He just wished Sam Riley could have been here to see it. Chapter 54. Onionga Oasis, 12 Days Out. Sam Riley stared at the small garage. It looked poor by Western standards, yet compared to the other hovels he'd seen around the nearby village, the owner of such a compound was comparatively rich. A single bus was housed inside the workshop. It was painted a horrible mustard shade of yellow and appeared to be held together with equal parts of rust and peeling paint. There were 4 large men sitting down and playing cards. They looked like thugs. He supposed they were meant to be motor mechanics, although the task of repairing anything seemed beyond them. Sam double-checked the tracker on his watch. The golem was inside. No doubt about it. Sam doubted the relic hunter chose to live in the middle of the Saharan desert in Chad. No, it was more likely that this was just a temporary stopgap before the golem was moved on. The question was, to where? Walking away for privacy, he contacted Elise, filling her in with every detail of what he had found. She listened fully until there was finally a break in the conversation. Then she advised Sam that the Suez Canal was now clear. The Trident had been refloated and was already in port. "That's great news," Sam said. "I knew Tom would be all right. What did my dad say?" Elise chuckled. "Your father was grudgingly appreciative. He said he couldn't believe you managed to pull this miracle off, but of course your team did most of the work. Then he told me it was the least you could do after all the time and money he spent on you over the years, and how you never showed any interest in commerce. He was sorry that you didn't inherit his tremendous business sense, or in fact, any common sense at all about how to grow your finances. He was pretty bitter about that. Said you're a complete idiot, and you have your priorities all wrong." Sam laughed until there were tears in his eyes. He only stopped as he didn't want to draw attention to himself. "Sam, you should wait for Genevieve, who was only a day's flight away," Elise said, once Sam had recovered. "Then she'll no doubt be joining you with a small army." "No," Sam shook his head. "I'd rather keep following the golem to see where it's going. I'll have my wristwatch. Genevieve can keep track of me through that. If I get into trouble, I'll hit my alarm. Then she can come to the rescue with all guns blazing." Elise didn't like the idea. Still, she knew better than to try and dissuade Sam with something like this, especially when he felt responsible for his friend's death. Sam hung up and wandered back toward Lake Yoa, where he'd left Bakit and his father, along with the 3 camels who were eagerly drinking from the bank of the lake. He was sorry to let his new friends go, yet he must discover where that bus was going. It would be impossible to expect them to follow the bus on camelback. Sam dismissed Bakit and his father, thanking them profusely and giving them their $10,000 reward for helping him find the people who stole the golem. He knew they would make their way back across the arduous journey to join their cousin's herd. Now, he needed to find some other means of transportation. Up ahead, he spotted a small trading post. It was round, like most traditional Chadian dwellings, built with adobe mud bricks. There was a sign in French which read, "Closing. Everything for sale." Sam stepped inside, happy to get fresh supplies, and to learn if he could buy or borrow a car. Perhaps there was a local 4-wheel drive taxi service who would accommodate him if such a thing existed in the desert. Inside, he was greeted by an astonishingly beautiful young woman with long, shining black hair. Her lips were full, her eyes dark and lively. There was an enigmatic expression on her lips, a solemn mixture of pain and unrestrained joy across her face. For a moment, the acute contrast made him utterly speechless. She said, "Hello, may I help you?" Chapter 55. Amira observed the stranger who had just entered her trading outpost. At first glance, given his attire, she thought he might be a herdsman from the Messeria tribe. But as she studied him more closely, she realized that he was anything but. The man had a muscular build that seemed to come from an athletic lifestyle rather than time spent in a gym. Standing at 6 feet tall, he had ocean blue eyes, brown hair, and a kind smile that put her at ease. As his gaze met hers, and he spoke to her, Amira noticed that his French was fluent. He carried a Parisian accent, quite different from the slower, almost melodic tone she was accustomed to hearing in Chad. His manner was polite, but she sensed an urgent determination and bold rebelliousness about him, traits that set him apart from the tribal herdsmen she often encountered in the Sahara. They went with the flow, tending to have an indifference to time, as though there was no rush. Amira couldn't help but be intrigued by the enigmatic figure who had appeared at her outpost. He was a contradiction of sorts, dressed like a herdsman, yet exuding the air of a man who had traveled far and wide, with stories and experiences that would undoubtedly captivate her. As she continued their conversation, Amira found herself eager to learn more about this stranger and the adventures that had brought him to her corner of the world. They spoke for a few minutes, and she became certain that he was not from Chad or any of the sub-Saharan countries. Perhaps he was European, or even from the U.S. The stranger asked, "Where are you headed?" "I don't know." She smiled, revealing a set of perfect white teeth. Then cautiously she asked, "Why do you want to know?" The stranger gestured toward the closing sign. "It looks like you're closing the shop." She laughed. "Okay, you got me there." The man suppressed a bemused grin. "So is it a secret?" She shook her head. "No, it's just—" "What?" "You're not from around here, are you?" "No," he admitted. "Is it that obvious?" "Yeah." "Why?" he asked with genuine interest. She tilted her head, taking him in again. "Your clothes are those worn by traditional nomadic herdsmen, but your hands look clean, and although I have no doubt by your appearance you've recently made a long and arduous journey by camel, you're unaccustomed to it. There's a grimace in your walk that suggests you riding camels is definitely not your forte." The stranger laughed out loud. "All right, that's enough. I get it." "Where are you from?" she asked. "All over the world, to be honest. The U.S. is my home, but so is Australia, and I spend most of my time far away from both." Amira tried to picture the two distant countries at opposite ends of the world. It was hard to imagine. She deflected his original question with another one of her own. "What's Europe like these days?" "Where do you want to go?" "Anywhere they speak French or Arabic." "You don't speak any English." "Sure I do, but French and Arabic are my native languages." He spoke to her for a few minutes about the general politics of the EU, of France in particular, and how the war in Ukraine had united the Union. That Europe had received more refugees than it had in the years since World War II. She let him talk for a while. He was animated while he spoke, and he answered her question with the honesty of an equal rather than dismissively, as she was used to being treated by a Chadian man speaking to a single woman. After a while she asked, "What about refugees traveling from the Mediterranean Sea?" "It still happens. I don't know a lot about it. Why? Are you trying to get out of Chad?" She opened her mouth to lie to him, but something stopped her. Instead, she began to tell the truth, and once she started, she didn't stop. Her tales of woe just came pouring out. She told him about spending time in France as a young woman, marrying the smartest man in Chad, and then being moved out into the small oasis town in the Saharan desert. How, despite everything, she'd loved her husband, and found a sort of strange peace in this land, until Badri had died unexpectedly, leaving her all alone and vulnerable. "Where will you go?" he persisted. "I don't know. I studied in France many years ago, but my parents died. The man I married took me out here. I loved him dearly. We were truly happy, but neither of us ever considered what would happen to me if anything should happen to him. It just never crossed our minds." "And now you're stuck here." "Exactly." "What will you do?" "I'm going to make the journey to Europe," she said, her tone determined. "How?" "There are some people smugglers who run a bus service," she confided. "It's leaving here tomorrow. I'm just trying to find the best way to go about it." Sam's lips drew down. "People smugglers?" "Hey, don't judge. I'm a woman alone in a Muslim country. You haven't a clue what my life is like." "Is that what that bus is for?" "What bus?" "The mustard one back at the garage?" The shadow of a ghost of fear crossed her path. "What do you know about the bus?" "Nothing. I was just asking. Why?" "We don't talk about that bus." "It's just a rusty old bus." Amira shut down. How could a stranger possibly know about the bus? "Sorry. Can I help you find anything?" The stranger turned his palms outward. "Sorry? Did I say something wrong?" "No, it's just I don't know you, and I think I was being too—" "Trusting?" She smiled. There was something about the stranger that put her at ease. "Yeah, that's all." "That's okay. My name's Sam Riley. What's your name?" "I don't think I'm ready to tell you." "You won't tell me your name?" "No." "All right. Well, it was nice meeting you. So you're not going to tell me where that bus goes?" "No," she said emphatically. Sam said, "What about how one would go about crossing the Sahara?" Her expression flashed with fear. "I don't know. I'm told there's a highway." "Maybe I can borrow a car. How long's the journey by car?" "I don't know." "How will you find someone to take you to the Mediterranean coast?" She shook her head, as though she didn't know the answer or didn't want to voice it. The stranger seemed to change his tack. He looked at her with those eyes, and a bemused smile on his face. He softened his tone. "Hypothetically, if an interested party were to cross from here to Italy, where would they head?" "You mean, what city would an interested party attempt to board a boat to reach Europe?" Sam nodded. "Yeah." "In Libya, it would be Tripoli, but there are stories of people starting to sail out of Tobruk as a means of avoiding the dangerous desert in Libya." "Anywhere else?" "Some leave from Alexandria in Egypt, but it's farther to reach Europe and a more dangerous sea route." "What about Tunisia or Algeria?" "I don't know. It would be too far to travel from here." She suppressed a mischievous grin. "Of course, people smuggling is a crime, and traveling illegally across borders can see you in prisons that I'm told would make you wish you were dead." There was something about the way she spoke that informed him that she was finished with that line of conversation. She'd enjoyed talking to him, but she was taking too many risks just by discussing it. Getting the hint, he bought some candy, thanked her, and left. She watched him go. A few minutes later, she cursed her temerity. Then she locked the door and began following the stranger as he made his way down toward the lake. He seemed to vanish. She picked up her pace. She watched him dart between two buildings and then disappear completely. Amira's brows drew down in confusion, and she walked hurriedly toward the lake. She passed a mud brick house. A moment later, she felt strong hands upon her. They were firm but not violent or intimidating. He moved quickly and brought her into a small alcove at the side of the mud brick house. Sam Riley spoke. "Who are you, really?" She dipped her head. "I'm nobody." "Why are you following me?" She looked up at his ocean blue piercing eyes. "Because I know a way to reach a people smuggler who can get you across the Sahara." "Yeah?" "Yes." She was breathing heavily now. "Just one thing. I need you to promise." Sam's chin lifted. "Promise what?" Her dark eyes flashed with fear. "I need you to take me with you." Chapter 56. 11 Days Out. Against his better instincts, Sam had left his weapons and satellite phone behind. Bakit and his father had agreed to take them back to Chad, where Genevieve would pick them up in the coming days. Elise wasn't impressed with the plan, but neither was Tom. Yet both had agreed it was the only likely solution if Sam was so intent on finding this so-called relic hunter who had been responsible for the assassination of the professor. Sam felt naked without weapons, but even Genevieve agreed a gun wasn't going to do much good against 4 or 5 heavily armed people smugglers. Besides, they might rip him off financially or drop him out in the desert to die of thirst, but he was being tracked by Genevieve, who would be following with a team by helicopter. All he had to do was hit the duress button on his watch, and they would come in, guns blazing. He was more likely to get caught at some border, or long before he reached a people-smuggling boat in Tripoli or Tobruk, or wherever the heck the bus was going. Sam had spent the night getting to know Amira, hearing more details of her plight and the fact that her husband was most likely targeted by the Shirako Syndicate for something that he'd found, or they thought he might find. Either way, she was in danger on her own anywhere in Chad, and had to get away. He felt for her. She was a young, intelligent woman who had followed the man of her dreams out into the middle of nowhere. Now she was in danger and couldn't leave the country. He had to keep reminding himself that her plight, although horrible, was no more tragic than those of millions of refugees around the globe who took the same risks to have a better life, or indeed, to have any life at all. He resisted the urge to save her through legitimate pathways. The simple truth was that his bias could be attributed to the indisputable fact that she was a strikingly beautiful woman, and he liked her. Perhaps it was simply biological, but his instinct was to help her. Sam gave her a fictional story about trying to reach Tripoli, but having lost his passport, he was in the dire position of having to get out of the country on his own. She dismissed his argument, seeing through the lie instantly. He wanted to tell her the truth, but he couldn't trust her. Sheepish about his inability to successfully lie to someone he liked, he then went with a half-truth. Somehow, half-lies were easier to tell. Sam explained that he had a cousin who had used the same people smugglers in the region who had left from this place a year ago. That cousin never reached Italy. Any number of things might have happened. He might have been bitten by a snake or died of any number of natural causes, or he had been kidnapped. Either way, Sam needed to find out. "What will you do if it turns out your cousin had been cheated?" she asked. Sam shot her a humorless grin. "Don't worry. I know how to deal with dishonest people." There was something about the cold, killer-like indifference in which he spoke that had shocked her into silence. They both agreed to trust each other and stick to their story. Sam was a distant cousin of hers, and he was there to protect her through the journey. It was a common story in a predominantly Muslim society. Women shouldn't travel alone. At 5:30 in the morning, Sam and Amira returned to the garage. Amira carried a single bag containing all her worldly possessions, and Sam carried two. Both were made of hide and purchased from Bakit's father. They contained food and water, along with meager items of no value to him whatsoever, but helped promote his story of a herdsman who was in search of a better life. Sam carried what remained of his $100,000 US in secret compartments on his person, and his watch was obviously a fake Rolex. It was the sort of thing purchased at any number of the tourist markets throughout the region. On analog time, the hands were permanently stuck in the same spot. His high-tech digital watch looked like it was broken. No one would bother stealing a broken watch. If Sam tinkered with the bezel, the GPS coordinates would flash up. If he held them both together, it would send an alarm. Genevieve would hear it and accept that his life was in danger. Then she would come and get him. Apart from that, the only other thing he carried of any value was a thin razor blade sewn into his sleeve. The mustard-colored bus was out in front waiting. It towed a large metal, fully enclosed luggage trailer. Sam recognized the four tough-looking mechanics waiting beside the bus. In their hands, they were carrying Beretta M12s. The submachine guns were used by the Italian and French police, and also the Chadian army. He could imagine several ways they found their way into the hands of criminals in the Sahara, but 0 ways they were likely to be picked up by honest mechanics. At a glance, he saw the weapons appeared clean and well-oiled. The thugs might look like glorified bodyguards, but their weapons indicated they were ready for action if it appeared. The sight made him feel better about leaving his weapons behind. They might have been useful against the bus driver on his own, but there was no way he was going to win a gunfight with 4 trained thugs with submachine guns. Better to appear to be a desperately poor refugee, willing to do anything to achieve a better life. Several people awaited anxiously for the driver, Musa, to arrive. A corpulent, angry-looking man waddled up to the front of the bus, a cigarette in his mouth. "Line up here, and come see me to pay your fares," Musa said, without taking the cigarette out of his mouth. One by one, the group of refugees lined up, paid their dues, and boarded the bus. Sam and Amira hung back. It was going to be a long drive through a hot desert, taking several days. No reason to get on the bus early. He ran his gaze across the various refugees. They were a mixture of young and old, families and singles. It surprised him how many single men seemed to be making the treacherous journey, but Amira reminded him that many of those would be trying to earn better wages in Europe for their families. The men would send them money for their fares later. When it was their turn to pay their fees, Amira greeted Musa. "I have sold everything, and now I have the money needed to pay for my cousin and I to go." Musa looked at Sam. He spoke in Arabic. "You don't look like cousins." She replied for Sam. "We're distant cousins, and he doesn't speak Arabic, only French." "No?" Musa switched to French, which was widely spoken throughout more than a dozen countries within the African continent. "Where are you from?" Sam suppressed a grin. "Somewhere I'd rather not be." "What's your name?" "Sam." "Really? I have not heard that name very often anywhere in Africa." Sam spread his hands. "But I'm from Europe." Sam grinned. "Or at least that's where I intend to be from." Musa frowned. You are in trouble with the law. Not yet, Sam replied. Musa laughed. Are you running from the police? Does it make a difference if I am? The man nodded. Certainly. If that's the case, it will be another $2,500. Sam drew a breath. Let's call it 3,000, and you forget about asking any more questions. Musa paused, thought about that, and then appeared happy with the equation. Sam had no doubt this was just the middleman, and those 3,000 US were going straight into his pocket. Musa smiled gleefully. It's a deal. Sam asked, What about our luggage? You can take one bag each on the bus. Sam held out his bags. But I have two. We don't have room for two. One is the rule. Sam glanced at the enclosed luggage trailer. It seemed like overkill for the dozen or so people about to board the bus. What about that? Musa's voice turned cold. The trailer is full already. You can keep one bag each, or you can wait here for another bus. Do you understand? Sam looked at his two bags as though this was the toughest decision he had ever made. He dropped one, then stepped on board the bus. For the first time in his life, he was now an illegal migrant without a passport, being smuggled into another country. He rolled open the window to allow fresh air into the bus. Then he settled in for the ride. Chapter 57. The dilapidated old bus rumbled along the dusty road from Onionga due north toward the Mediterranean Sea, some 1,500 miles away. Sam and Amira sat huddled together on the torn seats at the very back of the bus, their eyes darting nervously around the interior. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and the acrid scent of Musa's cigarette smoke. The driver chain-smoked as he navigated the treacherous route, his hands gripping the wheel with practiced ease. He was accompanied by 4 burly men, armed with submachine guns, who kept a close eye on the passengers and the hidden contraband towed in a trailer behind. Sitting up front, along with the guards, was another man that grabbed Sam's interest. At first, Sam thought he was just another migrant, but there was an insolence about him. More than that, he was commanding. He didn't carry a weapon of any sort, but his stance suggested he was more powerful than those with the submachine guns. A sort of sixth sense, a warrior vibe, stirred in that primitive part of Sam's lizard brain, suggesting the unknown stranger was much more than he appeared. He seemed to be resting on the bus, sleeping for large parts of the day. Yet when he was awake, he could be seen talking and joking with the 4 guards, but never Musa, the bus driver, almost as if the driver were below him. Like seeks like, Sam thought. The bus followed tracks that were hardly marked and often invisible to Sam. Most of the desert consisted of flat, hard rock with a thin layer of sand and adequate driving surface at low speeds. Every now and again, a discarded soft drink can or a ruined tire confirmed that they were in fact following the road and not lost in the wilderness. The sun had barely risen when they started, but as the day wore on, the relentless heat grew more oppressive. The 20 passengers on board were a mix of migrants and smugglers, each with their own reasons for attempting the dangerous journey. Sam pretended to be a refugee, running from unwanted circumstances. Amira was one of the many immigrants hoping for a better life on the other side of the Saharan mountains. Amira kept shifting uncomfortably in her seat. Sam asked, "What is it?" "That passenger. The tall one up in front?" Sam said, "The one who got on the bus last?" Yeah, that one. Her voice little more than a whisper. I don't like him. Why? Sam asked, although his lizard brain was agreeing. I don't like him either. He keeps glancing at me. Not a friendly gesture like the others. More like the way an art collector looks at a painting, as though he would like to possess it. I agree, Sam said. I think he's dangerous. Stay close and just try and stay out of his way. Trust me, I'll try my best. She squeezed her eyes shut for a moment. But it won't be easy on a bus. As the bus navigated the vast expanse of the Sahara, he intermittently caught glimpses of various oases, which offered brief respites from the never-ending desert landscape. The first oasis they stopped at was a lush, palm tree-laden spot where a small muddy pond rippled in the sunlight. The passengers eagerly disembarked, refilling their water bottles and washing their faces in the cool water. Sam and Amira exchanged a few words, finding comfort in each other's presence amidst the uncertainty of their journey. The second oasis was a cluster of date palm trees, surrounded by small makeshift huts. Local merchants sold food and trinkets to weary travelers. The third oasis was a stunning sight, a large, clear pool of water fed by an underground spring. Tall, verdant grasses surrounded the pool, and the passengers marveled at the contrast between this hidden paradise and the barren desert around them. Amira waded into the water, allowing herself a moment of respite from the heat and the harsh realities of her life. Sam watched her, his heart aching for the challenges she had overcome and the dangers ahead. Finally, after 3 grueling days, the bus reached the Saharan mountains. The towering peaks were impassable by vehicle, forcing the bus to take a winding route around them. The passengers, exhausted and filthy, stared at the mountains in awe, their spirits momentarily lifted by the breathtaking sight. As the bus continued its laborious journey, Sam and Amira grew closer. They discussed everything from where they grew up to what their childhood hopes and dreams had been, through to what they hoped for now. It was a surprising connection, Sam realized, somewhat surprised, given how much of what he'd said was not the full truth, out of necessity. They knew that their destination held no guarantees, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow on the mountains, they held on to the hope that what they were after was on the other side. The bus had been traveling for hours under the scorching sun when a loud snap echoed through the air. The bus suddenly jerked to a stop. As the fan belt broke, steam began to rise from the overheated radiator. Passengers traded nervous glances as Musa, the driver, cursed loudly and jumped out of the bus to assess the damage. Uh-oh, Sam exchanged a glance with Amira. This could be very bad. Chapter 58. In the full heat of the day, without any shade whatsoever, everyone disembarked into the scorching sand. Sam and Amira moved away, watching from a distance, as Musa and the armed guards huddled around the engine. Musa tried to fit a spare belt, but it was too short, prompting him to curse even louder. Wanting to lighten the mood and unable to help himself, Sam jokingly said, "Musa, you should use your own belt instead." The passengers burst into laughter, but Musa's expression darkened. He glared at Sam and demanded his belt, but Sam opened his cotton jalabiya, pointing out that he wasn't wearing one. However, he offered to assist in any other way he could. The tension between Musa and Sam was palpable, and the armed guards stepped closer, as though they were still deciding whether or not to intervene. Tarek, the tall stranger, approached. The 4 guards and Musa immediately went still in his presence. Tarek growled, "Musa, use your own damned belt, and let's get going." Musa hesitated briefly, but ultimately complied. "The bus will be leaving soon." Sam observed the exchange with interest, realizing that the power dynamics were more complex than he initially thought. The mechanic guards were the ones in control, and Musa was just a pawn in their smuggling operation. But more than that, the guards were under the command of the man they called Tarek. Once the fan belt was replaced and the engine cooled, the bus was ready to continue its journey. However, before Sam could board, Musa approached him with a menacing scowl. He demanded Sam's watch, an obvious act of retaliation. Reluctantly, Sam handed it over, telling Musa that it didn't even work. Musa snatched the watch and climbed back into the driver's seat, leaving Sam to ponder the volatile relationships he had just witnessed. As the bus rumbled back to life, Sam and Amira exchanged concerned glances. The smuggling ring was more dangerous than they had anticipated, and Sam knew he would have to tread carefully to avoid making more enemies. But for now, all they could do was continue their perilous journey, with the hope that they would reach their destination safely. The Tibesti Mountains dominated the skyline up ahead. The mountain range in the central Sahara was primarily located in the extreme north of Chad, with a small portion in southern Libya. The highest peak in the range, Emi Kusi, lies to the south at a height of more than 12,000 feet and was the highest point in both Chad and the Sahara. The bus turned northeast toward the deadly anti-personnel landmines that riddled the Ayuzu Strip. Chapter 59. The old bus trundled along as Musa steered it onto the Ayuzu Strip, a narrow band of land that had once been a contested territory between Chad and Libya. The atmosphere inside the bus grew solemn and tense, as the passengers were all too aware of the risk of landmines in the region. The Ayuzu Strip had been the site of numerous conflicts, including the Toyota War in the late 1980s, where the Chadian and Libyan forces had clashed, using heavily armed pickup trucks, hence the name. As the bus moved cautiously through the hazardous terrain, the passengers exchanged anxious glances, all too aware of the explosives lurking beneath the sand. At one point, Musa suddenly turned the bus due east, catching Sam's attention. Walking down the aisle, he approached the front of the bus and asked the driver where they were heading. Musa simply shot him a warning glare and replied, "Mind your own business. Only I know the way through the landmines." Sam retreated to his seat, not wanting to provoke the volatile driver further. There was nothing he could do, so Sam sat back in his seat, folded his hands, and relaxed. Not that it bothered him. He was following the golem and couldn't care less about missing a visit to Tripoli or Tobruk along the way. Even without the tracker in his watch, Genevieve would follow the one attached to the golem. It was presumably still inside the enclosed luggage trailer, and consequently she would know where they were headed. Amira leaned close to him. "What was that all about?" "Nothing," Sam shrugged. "Musa says he's having to go the long way around to avoid hitting landmines." "Do you believe him?" "Not even a little. We left the Ayuzu Strip a long way back." "Then where the hell are we going?" Sam shook his head. "I haven't a clue." Her voice was tense. "What can we do about it?" Sam gave an apologetic shrug. "Absolutely nothing." Hours later, the bus pulled up in front of what appeared to be a small oasis. However, it looked more like a fortified compound than a typical nomadic village. A barbed wire fence protected a small fuel depot, and several cars were parked haphazardly nearby. The passengers disembarked, staring at the makeshift tents that dotted the surrounding area. Sam's gaze was drawn to two enormous boulders on the nearby hills. They resembled giant elephants. From what appeared to be an opening in the earth beneath a hidden cave between the boulders, dozens of impoverished people emerged, lean and limping, their faces weary and worn. Amira looked at Sam, her eyes wide with concern. "What is this place?" Sam surveyed the scene before them, taking in the desperate faces and the heavily guarded compound. "If I had to guess," he responded with an unhappy sigh, "I'd say this is a working gold mine." "That makes no sense." Amira's brow furrowed. "If it's a gold mine, why does everyone look so desperately poor?" Chapter 60. From the front of the bus, as people got off, Musa began collecting the second half of their payments. Sam's mouth firmed into a hard line. This was a bad sign. Amira whispered, "What do we do?" "There's not much we can do now we're here. We'll just take it step by step." They walked to the door at the front of the bus. "End of the line." Musa held out his hand. "Final payment." Sam said, "Hang on a second. We paid to reach the Mediterranean Sea. You'll get your second half of the payment when we can see water." Musa wasn't deterred. "Tripoli is only another hour away." Sam shrugged. "So you'll get your money in another hour." No, it doesn't work that way. We need to take on a guide who is our intermediary from Libya. He makes sure no one at the border checks the passengers on the bus. I must pay him his fees to bribe the border guards. That is how it is done." Sam didn't like what he was hearing, but what could he do about it? Nothing right now. Sam and Amira paid the rest of their fees and got off the bus. The bus was taken around the back into the compound with the fuel depot and refilled. A small Arabic man with several unnaturally small gold teeth introduced himself as Asif. He welcomed everyone and told them to enjoy their dinner in the main guest tent. The food served was a type of meaty stew. Sam was surprised. It was better than anything else they had been given so far during the whole trip. That night they went to bed in a large tent that accommodated the entire group of illegal immigrants. The next morning they were treated to a shakshuka, a traditional breakfast dish in Libya, with eggs cooked in a pan, with tomatoes, onions, chili peppers, and lamb. The day was already looking up. Sam and Amira ate a large helping of the meal, giving them the strength to face whatever tricks Musa might have up his sleeve today. Afterward, Sam suggested they go outside and stretch their legs. They stepped outside the food tent and stared in shock. Amira put her hand to her mouth. "Where's the bus?" Chapter 61. The Gold Mine, 8 days out. Sam knew they were in serious trouble. The extent of the illicit organization was suddenly dawning on him. Musa was just a small cog in the greater criminal project. He drove drugs, weapons, or in this case the golem, across the Sahara into Libya, while also delivering the illegal immigrants searching for a better life into the lap of slavery. His memory cast back to the faces of those desperately poor souls working the gold mine. He'd wondered at the time why anyone would choose such a life, But now it became clear. They had simply been ignorant, just like the rest of the people on the bus. Musa wasn't smuggling humans. He was involved in human trafficking. Asif walked down to greet them. He wore the confident smile of a man who'd been through this exact farce many times before. Sam said, "Hey, Asif, where did our bus go?" Asif gave a nonchalant shrug. "How should I know? Any idea when it will come back? Do I look like a conductor?" "No, but you're going to have 12 angry immigrants if it doesn't come back." Asif looked at him, a cruel smile twisted across his rotten teeth. "You're not my problem," Sam asked. "So what are we expected to do? Wait here for another bus? We'll just eat here and sleep here until the next one comes along." Asif folded his thin, wiry arms across his chest. "No, I have a gold mine to run. You can all help dig." "So we're to be slaves at your gold mine?" Asif feigned indignation at the remark. "Good gracious me! By all means I wouldn't dream of using slave labor." He gestured to the wide-open expanse with an enclosure only around the fuel depot and vehicle storage. "Do you see any fences to keep you here? No? Why then, you're all free to go." The lines in Amira's face deepened with puzzlement. "Go where?" "The Libyan coast is 120 miles north." "How do you suggest we get there?" Sam asked. "Walk, if it's that important to you." Sam shook his head. It was 110 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade. They couldn't carry enough water to survive more than 30, much less alone 120 miles. Besides, given the expanse of rolling sand dunes that made up the Sahara, it was unlikely any of them could find it, even if they could carry enough water and food to sustain their journey. Now they really were trapped. Sam said, "What if we don't want to work?" "Then I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Our food and accommodation are only for those willing to work." Amira whispered, "I think we're in serious trouble." Sam nodded. "I hate to say it, but I think you're right. Just hang in there. A little bit of heavy labor won't do you any harm." She looked at him, surprised by how quickly he'd accepted their fate. "Do you have a plan?" "Not yet." Sam shot her a lopsided grin. "But I'm working on it." Chapter 62. It was freezing cold in the desert morning as Asif split the illegal immigrants up into two groups. The men were set to work down in the mine, while the women were told they would work in the kitchen and the laundry. Sam squeezed Amira's hand. It was a gentle, affectionate gesture. He met her gaze. He leaned in close to her ear and said, "Do what they ask. I'm going to get us out of here." She mouthed the word, "How?" "You'll see. Just be patient for a few days." Sam stepped through the twin boulders, their resemblance to giant elephants strikingly eerie. The entrance to the cave at the back loomed before him, a gaping maw ready to swallow him whole. With a deep breath, he descended into the gold mine, darkness enveloping him like a thick, suffocating blanket. After the morning chill, the heat surprised him. Despite being underground, it was sweltering, the air heavy with humidity and the stench of fear, despair, and sweat. As Sam ventured further into the mine, he observed the male immigrants who had been forced into labor. They were split into various roles, proof of the cruel efficiency of the mining process. Men with sunken cheeks hammered away at the rocky walls, while others hauled carts of rubble, their backs bent under the weight. Sam was handed a jackhammer and assigned the task of breaking large boulders into smaller pieces. These fragments would then be further crushed, the gold ore painstakingly extracted. When he turned the tool on, He felt the vibration deep in his bones. As he worked, his hands grew numb from the unrelenting force. Around him, Sam could see the devastating toll the mine had taken on the older slaves. Their malnourished bodies bore the marks of months, if not years, spent in this unforgiving place. Their skin clung to their bones, their eyes were vacant, haunted by the suffering they had endured. One man in particular caught Sam's attention. A frail worker, a ghost of what must have been his former self, struggled to carry a basket of gold ore. Sam noticed he'd cut new holes in his leather belt to hold up his loose pants. There was a distinctive brass buckle, which bore the image of a soldier carrying an AK-47 in the desert. Perhaps he was in the military at some time in his life. The worker's arms trembled beneath the load, and he paused for a moment, desperate for respite. A guard noticed the man's faltering and threatened him with a gun, the cold metal gleaming maliciously under the dim light. With no other choice, the weak slave forced himself to continue. Yet his body could take no more. He stumbled, fell, and died where he lay. His dead body lay there until the day's work was finished. A couple younger slaves were then directed to carry his corpse topside, presumably to be buried in an unmarked grave. Sam worked the rest of the day. His body was aching, and his spirit was heavy with sorrow. As the hours ticked by, he realized he couldn't keep this up for long. If he was going to escape, he needed to act soon, before he lost his strength. He refused to meet the same fate as the man who had died mere feet from him, his life snuffed out by the brutality of the pit, the name the inmates called the mine. Sam tried to find out what happened to Amira. The women were housed at the opposite end of the camp. He walked through the area. Most of them had been there a while, and he didn't recognize them. But finally he found someone he recognized from the bus, an older woman. He tried to remember her name, then it suddenly came to him. He said, "Odira, I'm looking for Amira. Have you seen her?" Odira threw her arms over Sam. "Oh, Sam, they've taken her into the compound with one of the other younger women." "Why?" She met his look with a candid gaze, her world-weary look suggesting there was only one thing criminals who ignored the laws of nature and man would want with young, beautiful women. Sam opened his mouth. "They can't possibly do that." "Prostitution, slavery, illegal gold mines, it's all the same. Our lives are over. From what I'm told, those who serve us these ugly dogs have an easier life of it." "Poor Amira," Sam said. "From what I hear, nothing has happened to her yet. They are saving her." "For what?" "Not what. Who?" She pressed her lips together in a firm line. "Al-Sharawi." "Who is he?" "The boss of the Shirako Syndicate. His name means the sandstorm in Arabic." Odira gave him a sympathetic smile. "I have been told he comes here at the end of the month to collect the gold bars personally." Sam said, "We have to do something." Odira gave an apologetic smile. "We're almost the end of the month. If you plan to do something, I suggest you do it soon." Chapter 63. On board the Eurocopter, Tripoli, 7 days out. Genevieve and her team were refueling their helicopter in Tripoli, the blades whirring to a halt above them. The team members huddled around a makeshift table, maps and documents spread out before them. They were discussing the typical routes people smugglers used from Chad to Europe, tracing the lines with their fingers. A Libyan government official, Youssef, had joined them in their mission to stop people smuggling. He was a big man with sharp features and dark eyes that held a wealth of knowledge. As they spoke, he detailed the rise of people smuggling globally. The numbers were staggering. Thousands die each year attempting to cross the Mediterranean Sea, Youssef said somberly, his voice heavy with the weight of the tragedies he'd witnessed. And still they take the risk. They are driven by desperation for a better life, to escape war, poverty, and persecution. The conversation was interrupted as Genevieve received a signal from the tracking device Sam was carrying. The device showed that he was in a village east of Tripoli. The team wasted no time. They quickly made a plan to rescue Sam, coordinating with Youssef and the local authorities. Upon arrival at the village, the team, along with government police, stormed towards the mustard-colored bus. Musa and the 4 guards were forced to open the enclosed luggage trailer. To their surprise, it was filled with illegal drugs. "Where's the golem?" Genevieve demanded, her voice cold and unyielding. Musa, his face pale with fear, denied knowing anything about the golem. Genevieve's eyes flashed with anger, and without hesitation, she shot him in the kneecap. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the village. Musa's pained scream followed. As Musa writhed on the ground, he finally relented. "The golem," he gasped. "It's hidden inside the largest Nubian pyramid, the one that's closed to the public." "And what about Sam?" Genevieve's voice was tight, her impatience clear. Musa denied knowing Sam. "Then where did you get that watch?" There was pain and desperation in his expression. "Please, I bought this from a traveler at a bus stop in Onyanga Oasis," he stammered, pointing to it as evidence of his innocence. "Liar!" Genevieve said, raising her gun and threatening to shoot him again. Youssef stepped in, his authority evident. "Enough," he commanded, his voice firm. "We will deal with him according to our laws." With that, the team refocused on their primary goals, to rescue Sam and recover the golem. They had no time to waste. Lives were at stake, and every second counted. Chapter 64. The Gold Mine, Sahara Desert. 6 days out. The door to the women's campsite swung open. Amira covered her mouth with her hand. It was Tarek, the tall, authoritative man from the bus, who had taken an interest in her, the one who seemed to be in charge on the bus. Unlike Musa and the guards, he got off the bus and stayed at the slave mine. The man handed her a small bag. "Put this on, and be ready for me in 5 minutes." It was a command, not a request. Amira made no response. He turned to Aquila, one of the longer-term pleasure women at the mine. "Make sure she knows what to do." Aquila said, "Yes, master." Tarek left. Aquila turned to Amira. "You can't avoid this." Amira was still processing what was expected of her. Aquila persisted. "The best thing you can do is to give them what they want. Tarek is one of the better men. You should be thankful he has taken an interest in you. I thought Al-Sharawi wanted you for himself. That would have been very bad for you. The man is an absolute dog." "And Tarek isn't," Amira countered. "Not like the Sandstorm. The Sandstorm made a reputation of being the most violent, ruthless man in the Sahara. You think he cares about the woman he's chosen to bed for the night? No. Be thankful you are to be Tarek's woman." "I won't do it," Amira said, although already her determination was being overruled by her deep sense of pragmatism. She was a helpless prisoner. Her choices were to fight, be killed, or be a willing participant in her own rape. It would be disgusting, but what choice did she have? It wasn't like she was a virgin. She'd been married for years. Rape would humiliate her, perhaps hurt her, but there were really no other options. As Aquila had said, Tarek was a far better choice than what she'd heard about the sandstorm. Amira opened the small bag. Inside was tiny underwear that belonged to a 20-year-old. Even then, she would have never worn it. It was all silk and lace, bra and thong, the sort of thing men fantasized about, but were hopelessly impractical and uncomfortable to wear. She bit her lip and questioned if she could really do this. Amira prided herself on being able to face any challenge, to get through anything life threw at her. Now, a sudden wave of grief, fear, and anger threatened to destroy her sense of self. Still, she quickly put on the lingerie as instructed, then threw a thin shawl over her shoulders. It could be worse. The rest of the slaves were underfed and kept in filthy, disheveled conditions. Amira and the rest of the girls in her tent were given clean clothes, good food, perfumes, and access to showers to ensure they were ready for their masters. Tarek arrived a minute later. Aquila, Nadia, Mariam, and Yara all stood up and left the tent. Aquila had explained to Amira earlier that at times some of the men expected them to participate. The sandstorm was sometimes like this, when he felt like it, but Tarek was only ever interested in one woman at a time. "What is your name?" Again, it was a command, not a request. Amira lowered her eyes. "Amira." "And your surname?" "Idris." She thought she saw some sort of recognition in his expression at her surname, which surprised her. He stared lasciviously at her with unrestrained desire. "Well, you're beautiful, that's for sure. Strip for me." She stared at him, defiance in her dark brown eyes, and crossed her arms. He laughed. Come. There's no reason this should be unpleasant for you. Strip, or I'll be sure to make it painful, and you will still find yourself yielding to me." Amira removed the shawl. She stood up. "Nice and slow," he said. She nodded. A moment later, the door swung open, and an armed guard barged in. "Tarek, she's being saved for al-Shawari." Tarek grunted, his eyes drifting lustily at her lingerie. "We were just—" The guard shook his head. "No, he peeked her out of our photos. He apparently knew her husband, Badri Idris. Al-Shawari was quite explicit. No one was to touch her, only him." The guard closed the door and went away. Amira shuddered, not sure whether she should be appreciative of the temporary reprieve. Amira repeated al-Shawari's name. "Who is the Sandstorm?" she asked. "He's the boss of the Shirako Syndicate." Tarek began pulling his pants on, zipping himself up. "Nobody defies al-Shawari and lives." Amira reached for her shawl. Tarek put a hand on the fabric to stop her. Shoulders back, chin lifted, she straightened her lips into a hard line. "I thought you said no one defies the sandstorm." "Indeed, but just because I'm forbidden from touching you, it doesn't mean I shouldn't get to see you undressed." She laughed at him. "Tarek," she said, showing that she knew his name. Her words were coldly challenging, and equally unconcerned, as though the outcome made little difference to her. "I am going to tell your master exactly how you have interpreted his commands, and we'll see who's right, shall we?" Tarek drew a breath. He began to laugh, his liquid green eyes locking on hers. He let go of the shawl, and she hastily wrapped it around her semi-naked body. "The Sandman won't be my master forever." "No?" She grinned back at him, licked her lips slowly. "But he is today." "You think you're smart?" Tarek said. He was teasing her, but she could tell from his eyes and the animated way he spoke with her that he was enjoying their confrontation. "I think I have nothing to lose," she countered. "No," he replied, a softer edge in his voice. "I think you are very smart." She didn't respond to that. There was no way she was going to glow with pride under his unwanted praise. "Sit," Tarek said. "The Sandman will lose interest in you soon enough." He paused. "That's his fault, not yours, I assure you. He prefers women younger than you are, and he rarely visits the same woman at the pit more than once. Twice if he really likes her. After that he becomes disgusted by her. I would never tire of you." She turned her head, not sure what to make of his compliments. "When that happens," he continued, "I'm going to come and take you away from here and make you my wife." She visibly shuddered at the thought. "I think I'd prefer to stay at the pit as somebody else's whore." Her voice was defiant. He shrugged. "We'll see." Tarek waited for her to reconsider her opinion. When she didn't, he said, "I'm going to be a very wealthy man very soon. I can take you anywhere you want and make you my queen. You are so beautiful. You deserve to be a queen. Do you want to know how I'm going to make millions?" He seemed to take her silence as acquiescence. "Let me ask another question. What do you know about put options?" He lifted a hand in a gesture to stop her, as though she had asked a question. "Never mind." He smiled. "Let me explain to you how I plan to steal from the rich." Chapter 65. At the end of the day, Sam Riley wasn't sure he could do another hour in the pit. Muscles he didn't realize he even had now hurt. Each step he took as he climbed out of the underground mine made the muscles of his thighs burn. His back ached, and the powerful muscles of his forearms and biceps felt spent. As he reached the surface, he glanced back at the giant boulders that concealed the entrance to the mine from potentially prying eyes of government satellites. Sam vowed it would be the last time he ever descended into the hellhole. Every day he worked below ground, he could feel himself getting weaker. There was only one meal a day, and it simply didn't provide enough calories to sustain him through the intensely physical work he was being forced to do. Each night he postponed an attempt to escape, as the likelihood of it succeeding waned. Sam was torn by guilt. He knew he needed to take Amira with him, but there was no way he could escape with her, too. It would be difficult on his own. Impossible with her. He'd spoken to several of the prisoners who had been imprisoned at the gold mine the longest. Most of them had survived by keeping their heads down, doing their work, and slowly staying alive. They had been fit, healthy, and young when they started. The oldest, in terms of length of stay at the gold mine, was 17 months. Most died within 3. None could agree where they were or how far they were from civilization. There was a consensus that the vehicles that came and left every few days traveled from Tripoli, although Sam was unable to find out any logical basis for their beliefs. He asked them all how far the gold mine was from Tripoli and got an estimation ranging it to be 70, 100, and 120 miles north. Even at 70 miles, it was unlikely he could do that on foot. It would take a minimum of 2 to 3 days if he was lucky. With massive sand dunes, it might take 4 or 5. Sam decided to go for a walk and do a reconnaissance of the compound. Maybe there were some weaknesses he could work with. He stepped out into the desert. There was only one guard on duty, and he was stationed at the locked gate of the compound. As Asif told them all on the first day, nobody was a slave. They were allowed to leave and walk to Tripoli whenever they felt like it. It was a joke, of course. Nobody in their right mind would even attempt such a brazen journey. But then again, Sam wasn't anybody. He walked 100 or so feet out into the desert and then turned around. A moment later, he recognized the tall, lissom silhouette of Amira running toward him. She threw her arms around him and hugged him intensely. When he finally broke the embrace, she said, "I thought you were leaving me without saying goodbye." Sam laughed, but he didn't correct her. She cursed. "Oh, crap! You are really leaving, aren't you?" "I must. It's the only way. Every day I stay here, my strength weakens. My chance of making it across the desert diminishes." Amira nodded. She got it. Sam said, "Come, walk with me. I want to reconnoiter the compound." "Okay, you're not going to leave me out there, are you?" "Not tonight. Come, let's go." "All right." Sam stood at the edge of the Sahara Desert, gazing at the sprawling mining compound that lay ahead. Dusk was setting in, the sun's final rays casting an orange glow over the arid landscape. A soft breeze danced through the air, carrying with it a fine layer of sand that stung Sam's sunburned face. He could taste the grit in his mouth and feel it between his teeth as the scent of the desert filled his nostrils. The compound, surrounded by a tall barbed wire fence, was abuzz with activity. Even from this distance, Sam could hear noise from machinery and vehicles as they hauled precious cargo from the depths of the earth. Occasional laughter and shouted orders carried across the desert, mingling with the distant roar of engines and the ever-present whistling wind. Despite the inhospitable environment, Sam spotted a group of desert foxes, their coats the color of sand, darting between sparse shrubs in search of food. Above, a handful of vultures circled ominously, casting their keen eyes on the ground below, ever watchful for an opportunity to feast. Sam couldn't help but admire the tenacity of the wildlife that had managed to carve out an existence in this harsh landscape. As he approached the compound, Sam took stock of his surroundings. The area was flat and barren, offering little in the way of cover or concealment. He would have to be smart and quick if he wanted to escape. The compound itself was divided into several sections, each with its own purpose. A collection of sturdy metal containers housed the gold storage, gleaming with the promise of untold wealth. He'd seen the soft glow the night before, rising from the same building, and guessed that was where the smelting for the gold occurred. Nearby, a fuel depot sat like a ticking time bomb, waiting for the spark that would send it up in flames. The mine guards' vehicles were parked haphazardly, their engines still warm from use. A selection of cars, trucks, and dirt bikes lay before him, each an enticing option for a quick escape. Sam's eyes, however, were drawn to a nearby building that was the sleeping quarters for the guards. He could see a few figures lounging around outside, their casual demeanors belying the danger they posed. Sam circled the compound, considering his options. He knew that a direct assault was out of the question. He would be spotted and captured before he even got close. Instead, he focused on identifying weak spots in the perimeter, places where the barbed wire sagged or the fence poles seemed unsteady. They climbed a sand dune and sat on the top of it, studying the entire compound. Amira looked hesitant, like she was carrying a secret and unsure how much to reveal. "There's a man named Tarek. He's driving out early tomorrow to Tripoli." Sam's heart leaped at the concept. "Do you know what time?" "No. He mentioned he wants to leave before sunrise, so it could be any time." Sam nodded. "I could leave tonight and wait for him on the road. There's a hill about half a mile out that you can see in the distance. Cars come and go. They sometimes get stuck, or at least have to slow down as they climb the sand dune. I could hide behind the sand dune, wait for him to come along, and then climb onto the back of the truck." "It might work. What time do you want me to join you?" Sam shook his head. "It's a long shot on my own." Sam shook his head again. "It would be impossible with the two of us." "After all we've been through, you're going to just leave me here?" Sam said, "Look, I have friends, heavily armed friends, searching for me in a helicopter nearby. As soon as I get out, I'll contact them and give them the coordinates. We'll come back for you, I promise." "If you reach Tripoli?" "Yeah, if I make it." Sam looked at her. Amira seemed to be working hard to hold back tears, her face a mask of rejection and pain. Still, she managed to smile at him with that full-lipped mouth that always made him think of kissing her. He was seized by an urge to take her into his arms. In the end, she beat him to it. She leaned in and kissed him. He kissed her back, eagerly. It was a long, soft kiss, their lips exploring gently. She stroked his cheeks and his hair, and he wrapped his hands around her slim waist. After a long minute, she broke the kiss, panting. At last, she relaxed her hold long enough to say, "Come back for me." "I will," Sam promised. He just hoped he could keep it. Chapter 66. Sam shivered in the darkness. The cold desert night was unforgiving as he lay behind a large sand dune, shivering under the vast sky, lit only by the distant stars. Sam was half a mile away from the compound, camouflaged by the darkness and the endless sea of sand, waiting for the perfect moment to hitch a ride on the Toyota Land Cruiser that would lead him to Tripoli. He clutched his single half-gallon water bottle close to his chest, hoping it would be enough to sustain him during the treacherous journey. Sam's teeth chattered as he tried to focus on the task at hand. He was unable to get Amira's understanding eyes and quiet courage out of his head. His breath formed clouds of condensation in the cold air, and every muscle in his body ached from work and tension. He had no warm clothes to protect him from the chilling desert night. It always amazed him how the Sahara, which was so deadly hot in the day, could turn so icy cold in the night. His mind wandered. He thought about the kiss he and Amira had shared, and he began to wish he'd granted her wish, and that she was lying next to him, sharing their warmth. It was too late now. He hoped more than anything that he would live long enough to get the chance to see her again. He strained his eyes, scanning the horizon for any signs of the vehicle that would be his ticket to freedom. Hours passed, and finally he heard the familiar sound of an engine rumbling in the distance. The Toyota Land Cruiser was approaching, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. Sam's heart raced as he prepared to make his move, adrenaline pumping through his veins. But just as he was about to spring into action, another sound caught his attention. A high-powered Rolls-Royce Wraith 6 wheel-drive vehicle approached from the other side of the sand dune, its V12 engine purring menacingly. Sam's heart sank, knowing that if he were to stand up now, he'd be spotted, and his chance of getting away would be gone. With a heavy heart, he watched as the two vehicles met, their paths crossing like star-crossed lovers in the night. The Land Cruiser began to move away, heading in the direction of Tripoli, while the Rolls-Royce advanced toward the compound. Sam cursed under his breath, realizing that he had to abort his escape plan. The Rolls-Royce was a Wraith, which had been heavily modified into a six-wheel drive with large wheels, making it specifically designed for the harsh conditions of the Sahara Desert. The original car was worth more than $1 million, and Sam could only imagine how much it would have cost to have the ultra-luxury car brand make such modifications. Sudden knowledge lobbed into Sam's brain like an unpinned grenade. There was only one person likely to be driving such a vehicle toward the gold mine. Al-Sharawi, the Sandstorm, the man who had claimed first rights to Amira. He couldn't afford to waste a second. With only an hour left before his shift at the gold mine began, Sam had no choice but to make a mad dash to return. He pushed himself off the ground, his legs burning with fatigue as he ran through the cold desert, each step sinking into the sand. Sam stole one last glance at the Land Cruiser disappearing into the distance, feeling a pang of despair. But he couldn't dwell on it for too long. He had to focus on getting back to the gold mine before anyone noticed his absence. The desert wind howled around him, as if mocking his failed attempt to escape, but he pushed on, knowing that he'd have to find another way to break free. He had to do it for himself, and for Amira. Chapter 67. 5 Days Out. It was a new sort of hell working the pit without rest. He toiled throughout the day in a sort of sleep-deprived stupor. He considered taking another day, but he couldn't. Was Amira okay? Was she hurt? All he knew for sure was that he was running out of time. Sam waited until midnight. The guards changed. The graveyard shift guard started. He walked slowly, disinterestedly, with his Beretta M12, as he made a customary search of the outer ring of the compound. At 2 a.m., he seemed noticeably less eager to do his job. Sam approached. He called out to the guard. The guard looked surprised to see him, but not concerned. He had his trigger finger at the ready on the Beretta M12 submachine gun. Despite the unusual occurrence of a slave meeting him at the compound at such time, he wore the disinterested expression of a man who knew he held all the cards, as if he was thinking, "What could a slave do to me?" "I'm sorry to interrupt," Sam apologized, holding his hand up to reveal a small piece of paper. "Al-Sharawi has sent me to give you an urgent communication." "What's in the message?" I don't know. Sam rolled his eyes, as though the boss would clearly not have talked to a slave about his message, merely treated him as a messenger and runner from the camp to the compound. Sam reached out to show him the paper. He's just given me this and told me to run it to you as fast as I can. Like everybody else, I know not to question al-Sharawi's orders. The guard looked flustered, but acknowledged Sam's last answer as a simple truism. The sandstorm was the supreme master of the gold mine, and his fury was unforgivable. He reached forward to take the note. The guard unraveled it. His expression was a mask of confusion. What's the meaning of... That was about as far as Sam was going to let this go. His fingers traced the small, sharp knife sewn into his sleeve. The blade was razor sharp. With a quick, precise movement, Sam slit the guard's throat. It severed both the carotid artery and the windpipe in one quick movement. The man's eyes widened with abject terror. He opened his mouth to scream, but only garbled air bubbled out of his throat. He instinctively reached for his neck in a vain attempt to stem the bleeding. Sam moved in quickly to cover the guard's mouth. With his other hand, he drove the blade between his fourth and fifth intercostal space, all the way into the man's heart. The guard spasmed for a couple seconds. Driven by adrenaline, Sam removed the blade and hammered it in again, between the third and fourth intercostal space. It severed the man's aortic arch, the largest blood vessel in the human body. If he wasn't dead yet, he would be in a matter of seconds. Then the body was completely limp. Sam quietly dropped him to the ground, an entirely dead weight. He then searched the corpse, retrieving the Beretta M12 submachine gun, a Zippo cigarette lighter, and the key from the dead guard's belt. His head on a swivel, his eyes continued to dart around to ensure no one had seen the encounter. Then Sam hurried toward the locked gate that protected the compound, where the gold, fuel depot, and Shirako Syndicate's vehicles were stored. He wiped the blood off the small blade and returned it to its secret hiding space inside his sleeve, in case it was needed again. The submachine gun was a weapon of last resort. As soon as he squeezed the trigger, a small army of Shirako Syndicate soldiers would come running out from the compound. He might take out half a dozen in the process, but there were way too many for him to overcome. Unlocking the gate, he slipped through and approached a cupboard holding the keys to the vehicles. He broke the lock, his hands shaking slightly, and found the key to the Rolls-Royce Wraith, which was parked at the outer ring of vehicles secured inside the compound. Sam unlocked the car with the proximity key fob. He climbed into the driver's seat. His eyes darted to the starter button. Next to it, he saw the fuel gauge was only a third full. That meant the car probably spent 2/3 of its fuel driving through the Sahara Desert just to reach the gold mine, guessing it would take a similar consumption to reach Tripoli going in the other direction. There was no way he was going to reach Tripoli, and the last thing he wanted now was to run out of fuel and become stranded in the desert. He popped open the gas filler, ran to the center of the compound. There were 2 separate pumps, one for high-octane gas, specifically for performance vehicles, and the other containing diesel for trucks. Sam switched on the pump. It ran silently. He grabbed the nozzle and ran back to the Wraith to fill it up. As soon as it was full, he locked the nozzle in the open position and began to douse the other vehicles in gas. Sam carefully made his way around each car. He took all the vehicle keys off their rack and dropped them into the back seat of the Wraith, just in case he missed a car. Sam then left the pump running, creating an ever larger pool of fuel on the ground. Whatever happened, he wanted to make damn sure nobody was going to get the chance to follow him when he left. He raced back to the Wraith, got in. The dash lights automatically lit up with the proximity of the key fob. His eyes looked at the starter button. Another second and he could be racing out through the gate. Sitting in the car re-triggered a memory in the back of his mind, and a wave of guilt washed over him. The car belonged to Al-Sharawi, a.k.a. the Sandstorm. Odira had said they were going to give her to Al-Sharawi. Al-Sharawi was here. Ergo, Amira was about to become the evil man's plaything. He couldn't do it. Sam got out of the car. Some things he just couldn't let happen. Amira was nobody's fucking toy. The extraordinary woman was destined to be free. Chapter 68. Sam quietly closed the car door. He shut the gate to the security compound and secured the padlock. Quickly, he made his way back to the women's tent. Startling Odira, she directed him to the next tent at the end of the camp. That was where the rest of the pleasure girls were now with the Sandstorm. That urged Sam on. Odira whispered, "Sam?" "Yeah?" "What are you going to do?" "What you suggested in the first place. I'm not waiting to do something about it." She squeezed his hand. "Good luck." Sam grabbed his blade, still hoping to avoid using the submachine gun. He almost got rid of the weapon, knowing that by the time he needed to use it, he would be signing his own death warrant. Yet the warrior within him believed in fighting to the death, so he hung onto it. He cut a hole in the side of the tent, trying to avoid opening the main part of the tent and maintain a chance of surprise. It was completely dark inside. "Amira," he whispered. "Who are you?" It was another woman's voice, one he didn't recognize. "I'm looking for Amira." "And I asked, who are you?" "A friend of hers. We were on the bus together." Amira stirred. Somehow she defied the odds and managed to get to sleep. She looked up, recognized Sam, and jumped up. She wrapped her arms around his neck and hugged him. "I thought you would have been gone hours ago." Sam grimaced. "Grab something warm, and let's go." She tilted her head, confused and still waking up. "You're taking me with you?" "You're damned right I'm taking you with me." "We want to come with you." Sam looked down to the floor. There were several women, all slowly waking up. "Take us with you." Sam shook his head. "I can't, I'm sorry." "Please," one of the older women begged. "We'll never make it out together." Sam drew a breath. "I'm sorry. Hang in there. The reinforcements are coming to rescue you, I swear it." By now, all the women were standing up, getting ready to follow him. None were willing to accept the word no. Sam quickly racked his brain, trying to work out how to appease the group of women who were naturally resentful at having been left to suffer the wrath of their captors once he and Amira escaped. Outside the tent, he heard Asif's voice say, "Can anybody else smell gasoline?" Chapter 69. Sam stepped out of the tent. The Shirako Syndicate soldiers began to come out from their campsite in a slow, incredulous, and possibly drunken stupor. Nobody imagined Asif's warning might be something they should be worried about. Asif directed two of the guards to quickly go check with Hussein, the guard on the graveyard shift protecting the compound. They needed to find out if he knew what was going on. Asif, still in charge, stepped into the women's tent. "Where's Al-Sharawi?" One of the women Sam didn't recognize answered immediately. "Al-Sharawi was playing cards in the guard's tent." Puzzled, Asif asked, "He never came to visit you tonight?" "Not yet." The woman, well practiced in the game of seduction, added, "No, we've all been waiting for him all night." Asif looked like he was going to call out her stupid lie, and Sam worried that she had overplayed her cards. Nobody would believe that any women would willingly be looking forward to sleeping with the brutal boss of the Scirocco Syndicate. He looked like he was going to question her further, then he turned and said, "Something's not right. Where the hell is Hussein?" Sam and Amira ducked down, hiding in the shadow of darkness that the shelters provided. Then they headed toward the compound. He and Amira skirted around the main tents. Up ahead, they could see the two guards playing with the lock on the gate, their faces registering confusion. One of them said, "Where the hell's Hussein?" Another one replied, "Oh, shit! The fuel's leaking!" The first guard fumbled his key into the lock and swung the gate open. One of the guards ran toward the Bowser to switch off the fuel. The other one blew the whistle around his neck 3 times. This was the disaster warning. Like ants, the entire army of Scirocco Syndicate soldiers raced toward the compound. Sam and Amira followed them into the fenced fuel and vehicle area. Sam's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the pool of gasoline that had gathered at the center of the compound. The gasoline trail snaked its way toward a large fuel Bowser and was also splashed over several parked cars. Sam's ears pricked up at the sound of distant footsteps and the unmistakable noise of guns being cocked. His adrenaline surged, and he reached into his pocket to retrieve a Zippo lighter. A smirk flickered across his face. The guards inside the compound spotted them. They put 2 and 2 together and realized Sam was responsible for the vandalism. The guards, to their credit, aimed and opened fire immediately. Bullets whizzed through the air, narrowly missing Sam as they ricocheted off the wire fence. Sam and Amira ducked down, taking refuge behind a large Toyota Land Cruiser. More shots were following from the opposite direction. They were still too far away to be any real hindrance, but the guards inside the compound were blocking their movement toward the Wraith. Sam took a deep breath, his fingers trembling slightly, as he ignited the lighter with a swift flick of his thumb. He exchanged a quick glance with Amira. "As soon as this lights up that fuel, I need you to run straight for the Wraith." Her eyes darted toward the Rolls-Royce. "I see it." "Good." He kissed her lips once. It was short and quick. Then, with one fluid motion, he hurled the flaming Zippo lighter into the pool of gasoline. The ground erupted into a dazzling inferno as the gasoline ignited. Flames hungrily began to devour everything in their path. The guards, realizing they were standing in fuel, turned and ran. Heat seared Sam's face, but he and Amira didn't hesitate for a moment. He sprinted towards the sleek black Wraith parked nearby, distant gunfire still chasing him like angry hornets. As he leaped into the driver's seat, Sam slammed the door shut and pressed the starter button, the roar of the V-12 engine drowning out the cacophony of gunfire and explosions. Amira got into the passenger side, then Sam planted his foot down on the accelerator. The Rolls-Royce burst through the chain-link fence that surrounded the compound. The car barreled into the desolate desert, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. Gunfire followed, but he quickly outpaced the guard's effective shooting range. Sam glanced in the rearview mirror. The fire finally reached the Bowser, igniting the underground gasoline tank. It housed 30,000 gallons of gas. It erupted into a colossal explosion, the force of the blast rattling the Wraith's windows. The parked cars and fuel Bowser were engulfed in a fiery maelstrom, sending a plume of black smoke billowing into the night sky. Sam's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. Glancing once more in the rearview mirror, he watched as the once menacing compound was reduced to a smoldering ruin. The weight of his actions settled upon him, but there was no turning back now. He had made his choice. It was time to face the consequences. As the Wraith sped further into the vast expanse of the desert, Sam couldn't help but feel a strange sense of exhilaration mixed with fear. His old life had gone up in flames, and the future that lay ahead was uncertain. But for now, all that mattered was putting distance between himself and the chaos he had left behind. Sam kept the Rolls-Royce Wraith driving along the semi-concealed road, almost completely hidden by sand. They were surrounded by dunes that rose 30 or 40 feet into the air. He grinned. "I don't think they're coming after us." "No, you made sure of that. Any idea where we are?" Amira asked, her voice shaking. Sam shook his head. "Not a clue." Amira stared at him, shocked. "You don't know where you're going?" "No." Sam glanced down at the performance vehicle's GPS. It was scheduled to return to Tripoli. A slow smile spread across his face. "But fortunately, the car does." Chapter 70. Verda MSC, 4 days out. Angelo climbed the narrow ladder, sweat prickling his brow as he made his way up to the compartment above the bridge. His heart raced as he contemplated what he planned to do, but it had to be done. Angelo hunched over a tangle of wires that fed the VHF radio tower that ran the non-satellite communications for the Verda MSC. With nimble fingers, he tapped into the wires that fed the VHF radio, manipulating them to send out an SOS signal in Morse code. The long and short dashes of the code bypassed the pirates' communication jamming efforts, echoing out into the open sea in hopes of reaching a friendly vessel. He had no mechanism to receive messages. There was no way of knowing if anyone had received or understood the significance of the Morse code. He just hoped, in this world of modern technology and satellite communications, that there were still some mariners out there who still recognized an SOS. Angelo kept tapping out the signal. His ears strained to listen for any signs of the pirate crew. He barely had time to react when he heard voices approaching the compartment. From below, inside the bridge, a voice called out, "Someone's using the radio." "Really?" came a male voice. "I don't hear anyone speaking." "It's not voice. Listen to the tapping. It's Morse code. I think it's an SOS." A third voice, this one coming from a woman, said, "A nearby ship putting out an SOS seems like some incredibly bad luck." "Worse luck," said the first voice. "That SOS isn't coming from another ship." "It's not?" "No. Look at the clarity of the frequency. That's originating on board the Verda MSC." The woman said, "Shit! It's him. He's tapped into the cables leading to the VHF radio tower." "Where would that be?" replied the man. "I saw some communication cables rising above the bridge." "He's here," the first person said. "Go! Get him!" Angelo's heart skipped a beat, but he ignored it. He continued tapping out the SOS. This wasn't about him. Even if he was caught, he needed to keep sending out the SOS as long as he could, in the hope that somebody would pick it up and save the rest of his crew. A moment later, the power cut out. The cables to the radio had been severed. Angelo immediately stopped tapping and began running. The compartment was plunged into darkness. Angelo's chance of sending out a further SOS had been destroyed, but he couldn't afford to dwell on this setback. He had to escape and find a new way to get the message out. As the terrorists scrambled to locate him, Angelo slipped out of the compartment and scrambled down the ladder, dragging in huge gulps of air from an adrenaline rush. He ducked into a narrow corridor, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he ran for his life. The terrorists were hot on his heels, their boots thudding on the metal floor as they shouted threats and curses. Angelo knew he couldn't outrun them for long, so he darted into a small storage room and hid behind a stack of crates. He could hear the terrorists growing closer, their voices raised in anger and frustration. Angelo squeezed his eyes shut, trying to steady his breathing and praying that they wouldn't find him. The door to the storage room burst open, and Angelo tensed, ready to fight if he had to. The terrorists ransacked the room, tossing crates aside in their search for him. Just as they were about to discover his hiding place, a sudden noise distracted them. He stayed hiding, his heart hammering against his ribs. His fingers remained on the submachine gun, waiting to fight to the death. Chapter 71. Sahara Desert. It felt good to put physical distance between them and the gold mine. Sam gripped the steering wheel of the stolen Rolls-Royce Wraith six-wheeler as it roared through the vast Sahara Desert under the cloak of night. The stars above served as his only guide, casting their faint light over the endless expanse of sand. He glanced at Amira, who was laughing. "You're insane!" Sam met her laugh with a wry smile. "You said you wanted me to take you with me." "I meant, talk about kicking over a hornet's nest. You just burned down their compound and most of their cars." "Every single one, I hope, or we're in some serious trouble." "They're going to be pissed by the time they come after us." "Yeah, you're right about that, but I intend to make sure they don't get a chance to. Besides, the Sandstorm, the boss of the Scirocco Syndicate, can't escape. He's trapped there, like we were. He's no better than the rest of the slaves right now." "Only until someone arrives to free them." Sam shook his head. "As soon as we can get a message out, I'll give the authorities their GPS coordinates, which we have here on the car. An army will come down so hard on the Scirocco Syndicate, and the gold mine will be shut." "How are you planning on contacting the authorities?" She glanced at the GPS. "There's a small oasis coming up in about 20 miles. Do you want to stop there and see if anyone has a phone?" "No, it's too close. People there must know about the gold mine. Thus they're either complicit or at least willing to turn a blind eye to corruption. We're in the Sandstorm's highly recognizable vehicle. I don't think it's worth risking. As much as it pains me to say it, I think we're better off driving all the way through to Tripoli." Amira opened the glove box and pulled out a phone. "Look what I just found." "Tell me that's what I think it is." "Yes, it's a satellite phone. Makes sense, really. Surely someone as powerful as the Sandstorm wouldn't risk driving across the Sahara without access to satellite communication in case anything went wrong. After all, even a Rolls-Royce can break down." Sam grinned. "Can you drive?" "Sure." "Great. I need to make a phone call, and I'd rather keep moving, putting more distance between us and the gold mine." "Agreed." Sam slowed down the car, put it in park, and got out. Amira shuffled over the center console, adjusted the driver's seat. She revved the powerful V12. "You picked a nice car to steal." "Thanks. I was more interested in picking something that would get us across the desert, but the additional luxury after the bus ride and our time at the gold mine is a total bonus." Sam clipped his seatbelt on. "You're good to drive. I just need to make a call." Amira gently planted her foot on the accelerator, and the six-wheel Wraith leaped forward. Sam opened the satellite phone, extended the antenna, and opened the sunroof until the sat phone had a direct line of sight with the orbiting satellites. Glancing at the screen, he dialed a number from memory. Elise answered on the first ring. "Hello?" Without preamble, Sam said, "Hey, Elise, let me give you some details in case this phone cuts out." "Go for it." Sam didn't need to ask if she had a pen and paper. Elise was one of those extraordinarily rare people blessed with a genuine photographic memory. She could record every number, GPS coordinate, and thing he told her without any error or hesitation. He started with the highest priorities and then worked his way down the list. "These are the coordinates for the gold mine, where we've been held prisoner and illegally forced to work. It's owned by the Shirako Syndicate, and their leader, Al-Sharawi, a.k.a. the Sandstorm, is there too. I've stolen his vehicle and burned the rest of their transport. No one can escape. If you contact the joint Libyan and Chad task force that deals with smuggling and human trafficking, they can make a massive arrest today. Be aware there are roughly 45 people being held there as slaves. You'll recognize them. They're the ones that are half-starved." Elise paused, mentally recording everything. "Got it." "Next, if you search the data from Professor Xavier Griffith's SIM card again, you should find another GPS tracker. This one is attached to the first golem, the one that was being shipped to Europe on board the Verde MSC. It should lead to the lost ship." "Great, I'll sort it out. Tom is on board the Tahila, and they're searching for it now along the east coast of Africa." Sam smiled. If Tom was there, it meant the Trident was still afloat and doing fine. "What about Genevieve and the rest of the crew?" "They're with him. They followed your original tracker and personal tracker and caught up with a bus. They were never transporting the golem, just drugs. Somehow the golem's tracker must have fallen onto the bags that the smugglers were carrying. The golem was left inside one of the pyramids, back at Meroe. Genevieve retrieved it. It's now on board the Tahila." "That's great news." "What about you, Sam?" "I'm with one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen. We've stolen a Rolls-Royce Wraith 6-wheel drive vehicle with a V12 engine, so we're making excellent time." Elise laughed. "Good for you." "I know, right? We're currently driving across the Sahara into Tripoli. We should be there in 24 hours. We're only 120 miles away, but it's slow going, and the road is anything but straight. Half the time it isn't even visible." "Okay, let me know if you need anything else." "Thanks, I will," Sam said. "Oh, one more thing." "Shoot." Sam's voice turned hard. "Tell Tom, when he reaches the Verde MSC," he paused. "Well, tell him to give them hell." Chapter 72. For nearly 48 hours, Sam had been awake, driven by adrenaline and a fierce determination to survive. But now, as the excitement began to wear off, fatigue weighed heavily on him. His eyelids kept closing. He fought to keep them open, knowing that even the slightest lapse in attention could be disastrous. The Wraith's engine hummed steadily, lulling Sam into a state of near hypnosis. He shook his head vigorously, attempting to jolt himself awake. Yet the battle against exhaustion was becoming increasingly difficult to win. Amira was still at the wheel, but it took two just to keep track of the road. It was barely visible, covered in so much sand. He was worried if he drifted too far, they might roll down a sand dune and become buried or unable to keep driving somehow. With the last of his strength, Sam rolled down the window, hoping the cool night air would help keep him alert. He inhaled deeply, the crisp, dry desert breeze filling his lungs and momentarily reviving his senses. The night stretched on, and Sam fought to stay awake while Amira kept control of the Wraith as it barreled through the desert. As dawn approached, the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, casting a golden glow on the sand dunes. The sight of the new day brought a renewed sense of hope to Sam, and he found the energy to press on, determined to survive and to save those who counted on him. They drove into a small oasis town. Amira exchanged a glance with Sam, as if to say, "Should we stop?" He shook his head, afraid that somebody there would instantly recognize the unique car as belonging to the Sandstorm, and she kept going. It was slow going, less than 10 miles an hour for most of the time. They were both so tired. As their adrenaline ebbed, it became harder for them to stay awake. Amira slowed the car, pulling off the road. Not that it was likely that they would run into any other vehicles where they were. The only ones that traveled that route were most likely burned out at the gold mine. Still, there was the risk that they would be met by an incoming car traveling to the mine and owned by the Scirocco Syndicate. "You okay?" Sam asked. "Yeah, I just need 5 minutes to wake up." "You want me to drive for a bit?" "You've had less sleep than me. It's all right. I just need a minute." "Okay, take what you need." She switched off the engine. Sam turned his gaze sideways, looking at her. She bore his scrutiny without comment, but she was thoughtful. He took her hand and stroked her slim, feminine fingers. She looked at him, her face unreadable, but she didn't pull away her hand. He said, "I know I shouldn't, but I really want to kiss you again." She made no reply, but continued to look at him with that enigmatic expression, half amused and half sad. He took her silence as assent and kissed her. Her mouth was soft and moist. He closed his eyes, concentrating on the sensation. To his surprise, her lips parted, and he felt the tip of her tongue. It ran along his upper lip, then his lower. He opened his mouth. He put his arms around her and pulled her to him, but she slipped out of his embrace, pulling backward for a second. Sam said, "Are you okay?" Amira nodded, an unfathomable smile on her parted lips. "Never better." She then clambered over the center console and straddled him. Chapter 73. Tahila, Indian Ocean. Midnight. "Where did it go?" Tom asked, staring at the sonar monitor. Next to him, Matthew removed his headset. "I don't know, Tom. If I had to guess, I'd say whoever was sending that SOS just got interrupted." "You think it was some brave soul trying to get the message out?" "Yeah, possibly a last-ditch chance at being located and rescued." "Anything we can do?" Matthew cleared his throat. "Well, we know the direction the SOS was coming from. We can't predict accurately how far away it is, although, judging by the strength of the VHF radio waves, it appears to be local." "How local?" "Give or take 100 miles. Tom gave a worried frown. "Not exactly close." "No, and to make matters worse, if the SOS was produced by someone trying to escape and they were captured, the most likely thing the pirate crew would do now is alter their course in any direction." Genevieve strode purposefully into the command room. "That was Elise on the phone," she said in a brisk, confident tone. "Sam's alive, and he's given us the GPS coordinates of a tracker used on board the Verda MSC. We know exactly where it is." "Great news. Have you brought the coordinates up yet?" Tom asked. "Yeah, and it's close. Go ahead and inform the Italian Special Forces." She beamed a satisfied smile. "They should be ready for takeoff now." Chapter 74. The black Augusta Westland HH-101A helicopter hovered above the stern of the Verda MSC. The assault team included Tom, Genevieve, and Who, along with the Italian Specialized Assault Unit on loan from the Gruppo Operativo Incursori, the Italian Tier 1 Special Forces Unit. The assault crew exchanged brief nods, the moonlit ocean below reflecting the determination and anticipation in their faces. With expert precision, the pilot maneuvered the helicopter into position above the ship. Tom and Genevieve exchanged a knowing glance, adrenaline pumping through their veins as they prepared to execute their daring plan. They were armed, but in this position, they were there more as observers than active roles. The Italian Special Forces were in command of the assault. The side door of the helicopter slid open, revealing the vast expanse of the ship below. The assault crew, clad in black tactical gear and night vision goggles, rappelled down to the vessel. One by one they slid down the ropes, their movements swift and silent. As they landed on the deck, they immediately fanned out, scanning the area for any sign of their terrorist targets. The small group made their way toward the bridge, careful to avoid detection. From behind the bridge door, they could hear muffled voices and the clatter of equipment. The leader raised his hand, signaling the team to hold their positions. There were 3 people inside, all armed. He signaled for a specific attack position. There were nods all around. Tom watched as the deadly GOI did what they did best. Using silenced weapons, they quietly opened the door. Then they started firing. The assault team took out all 3 terrorists, who were in the process of reviewing a digital map instantly. It was all over before it had even begun. The Italian Special Forces crew then went about systematically searching the ship. His arms in the air, someone shouted down to them in Italian. It was an engineer from the original crew, a man named Angelo, who explained that he had been the one to try and send the SOS in Morse code. "There were only 3 terrorists left on our vessel," Angelo said. "I killed 2, and one left on a helicopter nearly 2 weeks ago. I think he was the boss of this gang." Angelo showed them where to find his imprisoned crew members. The commander of the GOI team double-checked with the crew to ensure there were no other pirates aboard. Tom waited until everything was secured and then said to the original crew of the Verda, "I have a favor. If you want to make the people behind this pay, I'm going to ask for your help to deliver the Verda's cargo to its port in Italy." "Why?" the captain of the Special Forces team asked. "Because this whole thing was about the stock market. If the ship doesn't get to port, which was the hijackers' intention, they make a boatload of money. But if the cargo arrives on time, they're all going to lose their shirts." "Lose their shirts?" a soldier asked with a confused expression on his face. "You know, they won't have a pot to piss in." "I'm sorry?" With a wide grin, the Special Forces team captain spoke in Italian, apparently translating to his team and the Verda's crew that when the ship arrived in port, the terrorists were going to lose all their riches. "Ah, I understand," the soldier said. "The killers bet all the wealth they had. Then they made the gamble certain by taking this ship. Now we bring the ship in, and they lose everything, yes?" "You got it." Tom slapped him on the back good-naturedly. "Couldn't have said it better myself." Chapter 75. Sahara Desert, 3 days out. Still nuzzled into Sam's neck after that shattering climax, Amira finally pulled away just far enough to look at him in the moonlight. Sam stared up at the beautiful face of this smart, courageous woman. He met her dark brown eyes and fell into them. Their bodies entangled, their breaths synchronized, their hearts still hammering in their chests. Sam felt he could stare at her for hours. Amira broke the trance. We should keep going. Sorry. He huffed a small laugh. As much as I'd like to, I can't keep going. It took a moment before she got what he meant. Sam was making a joke. The instant he saw she understood, they both immediately burst into laughter. Amira threw her head back in a full-throated laugh. It was so unguarded, so genuine, so damned happy. She looked like he felt. Sam asked, "Are you feeling awake enough to drive now?" Eyes twinkling with mischief, Amira said, "Surprisingly, I feel refreshed and ready to go." Sam grinned as he watched her lithely clamber back over the center console, pulling up her pants and starting the car once more. Without preamble, she continued their drive. Afraid to fall asleep, they talked as the hours passed. It amazed Sam how much, after all this time, he still didn't know about her. She told him about how her husband had died nearly 3 weeks ago, and she would have never predicted that she would have found her feeling such strong emotions for another man when she should be in mourning. Sam said, "I'm sorry to hear about your husband." "Don't be." She shook her head. Her eyes misted, but her jaw set with stoic determination. "I madly loved him, but I don't think I ever really knew him. Had I known him, I'm not so sure I would have loved him. Does that make sense?" "You might be surprised to hear, but I think it does." "Really?" "Yeah. Love is one of those things. It's the ultimate delirium. Our primitive brains are fed so much dopamine that it's hard to make sense of anything else. When it's switched on, it's the most wonderful thing on earth." Amira smirked. "Oh, you have been in love, haven't you?" "Yeah, I really have." They talked some more about each of their first loves. Amira's husband, Badri, who she had only recently discovered she really didn't quite know at all. And Sam told her about Caterina Marcello, his first and longest love, followed by Aliana Wolfgang, both of whom he still loved dearly, but circumstances and their lifestyles unfortunately made a more permanent relationship difficult to maintain. Sam discussed his work in maritime salvage, along with his archaeology and the Tehillah, finishing with the fact that he had been working to refloat the Trident, which had run aground in the Suez Canal. He told her about the loss of his old friend, Xavier, who had been murdered in Sudan, how that had led him across the Sahara, following a GPS tracker he hoped would lead to the person responsible. Amira confided that she had been fortunate at the gold mine, as she never had to perform any depraved acts for any of the Shirako Syndicate's men. This was because the sandstorm had picked her out specifically from a photo and ordered she remain untouched. She belonged to him, and only him. Sam worried he would have been too late to save her, but she pointed out that the sandstorm had been smoking and gambling with his men. He hadn't yet visited the women in the camp. Sam asked, "What about the tall man from the bus?" "Tarek?" She laughed. "He thought he was going to have his way with me, but one of his guards came in and chastised him that the sandstorm was unforgiving, and had given the order that I was not to be touched and defiled by anyone before he got there. One of the girls in your camp said you were in the tent with him for hours." "I was." "Why?" "Honestly, it sounds ridiculous, but I think he wanted to impress me." "Impress you? Why?" She gave a half shrug. "I don't know. He told me he wanted to marry me." "Weren't you already meant to be given to the sandstorm?" "Sure, but Tarek explained that the sandstorm only wanted to be first with the women. He never kept them long. After he was done with me, Tarek could have me. But he assured me I should be happy, He was about to become rich, and that he would leave the Scirocco Syndicate and return for me. He wanted to marry me and make me his queen. I bet that made you proud. She laughed. I told him I'd choose a life whoring at the gold mine over that. Did that go down well? It made no difference. Like many men, he brushed it aside. His conceit blinded him from any suggestion that I might not want him. Sam laughed with her. How did he think he was going to get rich, anyway? She shook her head. Something about shares? I can't remember. He was big on trying to explain it to me, just to show me how smart he was. Sam's eyebrows rose. He was getting rich through the stock market? Yeah, he told me he had this special ruse going with put options. There was a ship that he had stolen after taking out 10 million put options on Fiat Chrysler automobiles. The cargo ship he took was carrying some rare earth element needed in the development of car exhausts. You mean rhodium? Amira nodded. That sounds right. Without the rhodium, hundreds of thousands of cars being manufactured today wouldn't be allowed on the road. The shares were in a massive dive, and he was heading to Switzerland to exercise his options. Apparently, it was going to make him unimaginably rich, somewhere to the tune of $500 million. Isn't that crazy? Amira's eyes widened when Sam started laughing. Up ahead, the towering buildings that lined the coast of Tripoli tipped the distant horizon. Sam's laughter slowed to an occasional chuckle. Then he said, I have to make another call. Sure, you need me to pull over or something? No, keep driving. She arched a delicate eyebrow. Who are you calling? Someone who is going to make Tarek pay. Sam lifted the antenna on the sat phone and dialed another number. His father answered after a few rings. Son, your team got my expensive ship afloat and out of the canal. Great news, isn't it? Sam realized this was as close as he was going to get as praise or acknowledgement from his father. You should have been here. I was sorry to miss it. But, Dad, I'm calling for a reason. If you want to make the people responsible for grounding the Trident pay, and at the same time make a lot of money in the process, I have an idea. What is it? You'll need to do exactly what I say. Chapter 76. OHSU Hospital, Portland, Oregon. 2 days out. The bright fluorescent lights of OHSU Hospital in Portland, Oregon, cast a sterile glow on the pristine white corridors. Captain Trent Higgins sprinted through the labyrinth, his heart pounding in his chest. He had received word that his wife Danielle was in labor, and he was determined to be by her side in time for the birth of their child. The urgency of the situation fueled his every step, sweat beading on his forehead as he approached the maternity ward. Trent burst through the door of the delivery room just as Danielle let out a pained cry. She was on the delivery bed, her face flushed and damp with sweat, attended to by 2 medical professionals. Relief washed over her as she saw him, and she managed to put on a weak smile. You were cutting that mighty fine. Trent returned her smile, his eyes shining with love and pride. Did you ever doubt me? Yes, she said. For the last 3 weeks, I was certain you were going to miss this. He hurried to her side, tenderly kissing her forehead before taking her hand in his. His strong, reassuring grip offered her strength and support as she prepared for the final efforts in delivery. You're doing great, Danielle, the midwife encouraged. One more big push now. With Trent by her side, Danielle mustered all her remaining strength and pushed with all her might. Moments later, the room filled with the cries of a newborn baby girl. The midwife expertly wrapped the infant in a soft blanket and handed her to Trent, who was overcome with emotion. "She's beautiful, Danielle," he whispered, his voice thick with tears. "She's absolutely perfect." As Danielle smiled at him and their newborn daughter, another wave of contractions began. "Please, don't let her die after all that has happened. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," the midwife said. "This is all very normal." Trent had heard about the afterbirth, the delivery of the placenta, but somehow he'd expected it to be easier for the mother, far less grueling after the delivery of their girl. Then another baby began to appear. The midwife pulled out the healthy, crying baby. She commented that this one was a boy. She placed both babies on Danielle's chest in what they referred to as skin-to-skin time. Trent kissed his wife on her forehead. She squeezed his hand. "I forgot to mention, I was pregnant with twins." "You forgot?" Trent whispered, his eyes widening in an expression of unrestrained joy. "The Higgins family, and now we're a family of 4. I couldn't possibly be any happier." Chapter 77. 6 Swiss Exchange, Zurich, Switzerland. 1 day out. Tarek walked along the bustling streets of Zurich, his polished shoes echoing on the pavement as he approached the imposing building that housed the 6 Swiss Exchange. The morning sun glinted off the glass facade, reflecting the vibrant energy of the city's financial district. Anticipation built inside him, knowing that today he would reap the rewards of all his efforts and walk out more than $500 million richer. As Tarek entered the revolving doors, the cool air conditioning greeted him. It was a welcome reprieve from the late spring warmth outside. A security guard nodded at him as Tarek made his way through the modern atrium, what was once the bustling trading floor, and toward the elevator that would take him to the new trading areas. As he walked through the empty room, he imagined this place in years gone by, a sea of traders, brokers, and screens filled with real-time market data. The electric energy of the room would have been palpable, as people shouted orders and the sounds of rapid transactions filled the air. On 16 August 1995, the closing bells rang for the last time on the trading floors, ending an era spanning more than a century. They were superseded with the world's first automated trading, clearing, and settlement system. Most of what he wanted to do today could have been done on the laptop these days, yet once his transactions were complete, he wanted advice on moving his money into private accounts and retrieving $10 million in cash. He stepped into a small office where an affable man in his 50s welcomed him with professional and familiar recognition. Tarek greeted the stockbroker by name. The stockbroker gestured for him to take a seat in a leather armchair that looked like it had been part of the building's decor for more than a century. Tarek dropped into the chair. The stockbroker took a seat behind a solid mahogany desk with 4 computer screens on a raised arm, which he'd swung to the side so that he could face Tarek without distraction. "What can I do for you, sir?" Tarek handed him his individual reference keys for his share options. The stockbroker brought it up on his computer. "Ah, you have 10 million options for the Fiat Chrysler shares?" "That's right," Tarek said, relieved that everything was in order. "I would like to exercise my rights on all of them." The stockbroker looked puzzled. "Excuse me, sir?" "I want to exercise my rights. Call in all the put options and make, by my estimate, roughly $500 million. I'm a little confused, sir. A puzzled frown creased the stockbroker's lips. You can't exercise these options? What do you mean? I own 10 million put options. They don't expire for another day. Why can't I exercise them? Well, sir, the stock value is currently trading at 5 times the agreed price of the options you have purchased. What are you talking about? The shares dropped after the Verde MSC went missing. Its cargo of rhodium is at the bottom of the Indian Ocean. The stockbroker looked really confused now. Where have you been? Have you not read the news? What are you talking about? The stockbroker said, The Verde MSC was found 3 days ago, and its cargo unloaded in Italy yesterday. The stocks have gone through the roof. But what about my put options? Sir, unless the stocks fall remarkably overnight, your put options are worth nothing. Tarek swore, got up, and walked out of the stockbroker's office. He had just lost $10 million, money he had borrowed from the relic hunter, the man who never forgave failure. Chapter 78. Radisson Blu Al Mahari Hotel, Tripoli. Sam Riley felt clean for the first time in weeks. He'd showered, shaved, and then showered again before climbing back into bed with Amira and sleeping for 24 hours straight. They were both recuperating. He flicked on the TV, which showed the news of an illegal gold mine and human trafficking operation run by the Shirako Syndicate, being raided by a joint Chadian and Libyan military operation. There was a total of 32 slaves rescued at the site, both men and women of varying ages, all from various African nations, having been taken advantage by alleged people smugglers who then forced them to work at the mine site. The syndicate's leader, Al-Sharawi, a.k.a. the Sandstorm, was burned to death trying to reach one of the vehicles in the compound. A reporter began discussing that the Sandstorm had apparently arrived to take possession of a large shipment of gold bullion mined from the nearby pit with slave labor. So far, numerous searches had failed to locate the gold. It was predicted to be valued well into the millions, if not tens of millions. Sam picked up the remote control and switched the TV off. He was happy to never see that damned gold mine again. Amira rolled over, straddled him, and kissed him long and deep. It was playful and mischievous, and something about it made him feel like a 20-year-old in love for the first time. Sam pressed his lips together, suppressing a grin. Amira's dark eyes locked on his, touching his soul. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice teasing and sensual. Sam shook his head, gazing at her striking features. He decided to tell her the truth. "I'm thinking that if you keep doing that, I may never leave." Amira feigned surprise, her eyes teasing. "What makes you think I want you to stay?" With a slow, easy smile, Sam hesitated. This was the first time either of them had mentioned their future. So far, they were simply living on the throes of passion after sharing a very near-death experience. Amira placed both her hands on his chest, leaned in, and kissed him softly. "I was only kidding, Sam." "I know," Sam said, internally questioning what he really wanted. Amira's beauty took his breath away. She was intelligent, interesting, and fun to be with. She needed to get out of Chad, but that's where her future goals seemed to finish. He wondered what she would like to do with her life. Did he have any place in it? What did he want? Something stirred in his heart that had been dormant for some time, but he was on board. He had no idea where this journey would take them, but he knew that in his case He wasn't prepared to jump ship just yet. Sam looked at her, and his voice took a soft tone, humble and honest. His lips parted in a genuine smile. Right now, I don't want this to end. Amira squeezed his hand. Yeah, me neither. They sat up, getting ready to leave. Sam's eyes landed on the small leather journal that he'd noticed her reading from time to time. Hey, what is that? Sam asked. I've seen you carrying it, protecting it since Oneonga. It must be really important to you, to choose it over everything else to come with you. This? She picked up the leather-bound book. This belonged to my husband. Then Sam, remembering that her husband had recently died, said, I'm so sorry for your loss. Don't be. I've since learned that Badri lied to me for years. Really? Sam frowned. Maybe he had a reason, like he thought he was protecting you. Maybe. According to his journal, he was working for someone who the Shirako Syndicate put him in touch with. You see, my husband was an archaeologist, more an academic than in the field. At the look on Sam's face, she laughed. Wow, apparently I have a type. I can't believe I've fallen for two men in my life, and both were reckless archaeologists. Sam laughed with her. Hey, who said I was an archaeologist? Aren't you? Yeah, specializing maritime to be exact, but I dabble in a little bit of Egyptology. Sam returned to her original comment. You said your husband was doing a job for the Shirako Syndicate. No, they just set up the deal. Do you know who he was working for? Not really. It was just a nickname or something. A nickname? Sam's chin lifted. What was it? The Relic Hunter? A chill of fear passed over him like a shadow. Sam swallowed hard, but the corners of his mouth were touched by a disbelieving smile. Are you telling me that Badri was secretly working for the Relic Hunter? Uh-huh. But he never found what he was looking for? No, that's not true. I think he did find what he was looking for, but whatever it was, he thought it was too special, or possibly too dangerous to be revealed. The Relic Hunter killed him, trying to make him tell a secret? She nodded. I think so. Sam drew a breath. What was the secret? Honestly, I don't know, to be sure. It was some sort of ancient artifact. I don't know what it was, or what it did. All I know is that it ended up getting my husband killed. He was a liar and a terrible gambler who had gotten himself into debt, presumably with the Shirako Syndicate. Apparently he turned to this stranger called the Relic Hunter to get out of the trouble he'd buried himself in. But he didn't deserve to die. No, he didn't deserve to die, Sam agreed respectfully. I don't suppose you have any idea what this artifact looked like. Not really. She reached for the journal and began flicking through pages, searching for something specific. Oh, wait, he did a sketch of it somewhere. Here you go. Sam looked at the open page in the leather-bound journal. There, beneath neat, cursive handwriting, he saw something that made the blood in his veins turn to ice. The third golem. Chapter 79. It's all connected, Sam mused. Then he said, It's called a golem. Her lips parted in a wry grin. A golem? As in that creepy thing in Lord of the Rings? No, that's Gollum, a mythical slimy creature that lived in the dark. The One Ring twisted him, making him evil. She smiled, her tongue just touching her parted lips, in a way he found hard not to find sexy and cute. Not the same sort of thing. He shook his head. Not even the same book or mythology. Amira's interest was piqued, and she asked, "So, what is a golem?" Sam leaned back, taking a deep breath before launching into an explanation. A golem is a creature from Jewish folklore. It's an animated anthropomorphic being, traditionally created from inanimate matter like clay or mud. The word golem itself was derived from the Hebrew word gelem, which means raw material. Amira listened intently as Sam continued. The idea of a golem has been around since ancient times, but the most famous golem story is set in 16th century Prague. According to the legend, Rabbi Judah Lo ben Bezalel, also known as the Maharal, created a golem to protect the Jewish community from persecution. Sam glanced at the book in his hands, flipping to a page with an illustration of the golem that Amira's husband had sketched. The story goes that the golem was brought to life by inserting a piece of parchment with the word emet, meaning truth, into its mouth. The golem would follow its creator's commands, but it had no free will or consciousness of its own. Amira's eyes widened as she absorbed this new information. So it was like a servant made of clay? Sam nodded. Exactly, but the story is a cautionary tale. The golem became uncontrollable, causing destruction in its wake. To deactivate it, the rabbi removed the parchment from its mouth, changing the word emet to met, which meant dead. The golem then returned to its inanimate state. Amira shuddered at the thought of a giant, uncontrolled clay creature wreaking havoc. That's an intense story. It is, Sam agreed. But it's also a reminder of the power and responsibility that comes with creation. The golem, in a way, represents both potential and the dangers of wielding that power. So what does this relic hunter want with a dumb human-like creature made of clay? Sam said, Well, first off, this one is made out of an extremely rare metal alloy known as orichalcum. As in from Atlantis? Hey, you did pay attention to something your husband said. Actually, he said it a lot. Really? She nodded. Yeah, he was obsessed with Atlantis. Interesting. Sam's ocean blue eyes seemed alive at the prospect. This golem in particular was said to have a series of blue dots on its back. Oh! Amira flicked across the pages of the journal. Like these? She showed him another drawing. This one revealed the back of the golem that potentially indicated stars. It was adorned with a series of star-like tattoos on its back. Yes, Sam nodded. Exactly like that. What are they? They're meant to be celestial coordinates. Baffled, Amira replied, You mean like a map used to indicate the position of the stars? Sam smiled. Yes, star charts. Astronomers use celestial coordinates to locate objects in the sky. Think of it like a map of the heavens. I thought this thing was old. It is old. Probably as old, if not older, than the Egyptians who built the pyramids. Really? Supposedly. I'd need to find this golem to prove it one way or another. Sam shared his theory about the significance of the markings. You see, this is one of 3 golems, and each one has a unique set of coordinates. My guess is that these 3 sets could be used to pinpoint a specific location through triangulation. Amira furrowed her brow, trying to make sense of Sam's words. Triangulation? How does that work? Sam grabbed a hotel pen and paper and began drawing. Imagine that each set of coordinates represents a point in the sky, like a star. If you draw a line between 2 of these points, and then another line between the other 2, those lines will eventually intersect, forming a triangle. The point where they intersect is the celestial location we're looking for. Amira stared at Sam's drawing, comprehension dawning on her face. So, we need to find the coordinates of the stars on these golems' backs, then use triangulation to identify the precise location they're pointing to. Right. Only in this case, we're going to be looking for something closer to home. If we can work out the locations of these celestial maps, we can then use those coordinates to triangulate something closer to home. Sam smiled. Hopefully, we'll find a secret graveyard that's been buried for millennia. What? She asked, a higher-pitched tone of skepticism in her voice. Honestly, some of the powerful people responsible for the golem once used the necropolis as a temple, and it is said to yield remarkable powers. Which is why someone from the Shirako Syndicate would want it? Indeed. As they prepared to move forward, Sam realized there was one more critical piece to the puzzle. We also need to figure out when this celestial map was made. The stars change position over time due to the wobble effect of the Earth. For instance, we currently look at Polaris as the northern star, but the ancient Egyptians used Thuban, which was part of the constellation Draco. Amira nodded, understanding the importance of this detail. So we need to determine the era of the pharaoh who lived when the golems were made to accurately interpret the coordinates. Exactly, Sam said. The stars have always served as guides for navigation, and in the northern hemisphere none has been more convenient than the North Star. It always stands due north, every hour of the night, the anchor for the entire sky. The Egyptians were fixated on the North Star? That they were. In fact, they were expert astronomers, Sam said. In particular, they were drawn to two bright stars that always could be seen circling the North Pole. The Egyptians referred to those stars as the Indestructibles. Today, we know them as Kochab in the bowl of the Little Dipper, Ursa Minor, and Mizar, the middle of the handle of the Big Dipper, Ursa Major, and the North Star. It wasn't Polaris, the one we see today. It wasn't? No. It was called Thuban, and served as the North Star at the time the pyramids of Giza were being built in Egypt. Architects used the star to help align the sides of the pyramids, and they achieved a near-perfect alignment with the cardinal directions. Over the centuries, though, Thuban drifted away from the celestial pole. Why? You want to know about astronomy and astrophysics? Hey, you started it, Mr. Smartypants. Sam nodded. The North Star is like an anchor, only it's a moving anchor, though. That's thanks to a wobble in Earth's rotation. Our planet's axis points to different stars at different eras. Today it aims at Polaris, but thousands of years ago it aimed at a star in the coils of Draco, the dragon, named Thuban, the serpent. Sam continued. Over the centuries, though, Thuban drifted away from the celestial pole. The gravitational pull of the sun and moon caused Earth to wobble like a spinning gyroscope that's winding down. It takes 26,000 years to make one wobble. Thuban was closest to the pole almost 5,000 years ago, and it'll resume that position in another 21,000 years, returning the North Pole to the clutches of the dragon. Interesting. Amira looked at Sam. You really love this stuff, don't you? Sam turned the palms of his hand skyward. Hey, it's the inner geek in me, and yeah, he gave a deprecating half-smile. I love this stuff. You really want to find this thing Badri was searching for? Yes, Sam said. I think I can help. Thank you. I just have one question. Shoot. Are you hungry? Famished. Let's go get something to eat. Sam got dressed and followed Amira into the elevator down to the basement, where the Rolls-Royce Wraith was still waiting for them. He sat in the driver's seat, pulled on his seatbelt, pressed the starter button. The powerful V12 roared into life. A moment later, he ran his fingers across his chin, and then through his thick, wavy brown hair. Sam pressed the button again, and the motor cut out. Amira looked at him with a wry grin. "What is it?" "I'm not sure yet." His brows turned down in concentration. He unbuckled his seatbelt. "Come with me." He pressed the button at the bottom of the key fob, and the trunk popped open. Sam stepped closer. His eyes, locking on a small crate, secured to a series of internal steel struts on the inside of the trunk. Sam opened the lid. Inside, it was full of gold bullion. It was more than just a month's supply. Probably the rewards of more than a year mining at the pit. It would be worth tens of millions, if not more. Sam slanted her a pirate's grin. Amira said, "What on earth will you do with it?" "Nothing," Sam said. "It's not mine." "Wait, it isn't? What about finders keepers?" "I've found lost property." He picked up a brick of gold. "As I know who owns it, I feel morally obliged to give it back." Amira tilted her head curiously. "Who does it belong to?" Sam laughed. "It belongs to all the slaves who worked at the gold mine. After all, they dug it up. It should be enough for every one of them, yourself included, to start a new life." Chapter 80. Venice, Italy, 3 days later. Angelo's heart pounded in his chest as he made his way through St. Mark's Square, gripping the briefcase that contained the $2 million he had borrowed from James Riley. The weight of the ransom felt unbearable, but he would do anything to get his wife back from Tarek, the man responsible for her abduction. His family had originated from Venice going back centuries, and he always felt a connection with the place. But now, as he waited, he forced himself to search the city for its beauty as a means of calming his nerves. He stood in the heart of Venice, in the bustling Piazza San Marco. The gentle sea breeze rustled through his hair as he observed various historical buildings that surrounded him. The warm golden hues of the setting sun bathed the square, accentuating the unique architecture. To his right he gazed upon the majestic St. Mark's Basilica, its Byzantine-style domes and ornate mosaics shimmering in the sunlight. He marveled at the intricate carvings and statues adorning the facade, each with its own story to tell. Angelo's eyes then wandered to the Campanile di San Marco, the tall bell tower that loomed over the square. Its imposing height seemed to touch the sky, and he could hear the resonant chime of the bells echoing through the air. Turning his attention to the left, Angelo admired the Doge's palace, a masterpiece of Gothic architecture. Its delicate pink and white marble facade was adorned with elegant arches and balconies that overlooked the piazza. He could almost feel the centuries of history contained within its walls. As he continued to survey the square, Angelo noticed the hustle and bustle of tourists and locals alike. The lively chatter of various languages filled the air, blending with the soothing sounds of nearby gondolas gliding through the canals. He watched as children chased pigeons around the piazza, their laughter contagious. The sweet aroma of freshly brewed espresso and warm pastries wafted from nearby cafes, enticing Angelo to sit and savor the moment. Finding a table at one of the outdoor cafes, he watched the pigeons pecking at crumbs near his feet. He followed Tarek's instructions to the letter, approaching the gondola that awaited him alone. The gondolier wore a yellow scarf with a blue band, indicating it was the right gondola. Angelo stepped on board. He opened his wallet and gestured how much, but the gondolier shook his head, telling him the fee had already been paid in advance, and then began to paddle out into the main channel, across and south, away from all the other watercraft, the little gondola slowly heading to the distant island of Giudecca. Angelo clutched his backpack. $2 million in 500 euro purple banknotes. It didn't look like much, but he would never be able to pay it back. He had been shocked and grateful when the old man, James Riley, upon hearing about his kidnapped wife, offered to fund the blackmailer's price. The gondolier turned into one of the narrow canals, glided under a series of bridges. Angelo's thoughts raced, his anxiety mounting. As they passed under a shallow bridge, the gondola suddenly stopped. Then the man he recognized from the Verde MSC climbed into the gondola, along with Julia, his wife. Tarek held a pistol to her head. The gondolier kept paddling the gondola as though nothing had changed. Angelo moved toward Julia. Tarek pressed the cold barrel of his pistol to her head. "Not so fast," he warned. Angelo turned his palm skyward. "I'm here doing everything you've asked. Please, I just want my wife back." Julia writhed. "Scream and I'll kill you," Tarek said, his voice cold and steady. The gondola continued on. Tarek's eyes darted toward Angelo. "Do you have the money?" Angelo nodded, lifting the backpack and opening it slightly to show him. The canal came to a dead end. It was surrounded by the masonry walls of century-old buildings. Tarek aimed the pistol toward Angelo. "Thanks, but you can't expect me to allow you to live after all the trouble you've caused me." Angelo's eyes widened in horror, his breath catching in his throat. In that split second, as Tarek prepared to pull the trigger, the gondola abruptly tipped over. All four of them, including the gondolier, hit the water. The world seemed to spin as Angelo, his wife, and Tarek were plunged into the murky water. In their surprise, danger from the gun was momentarily forgotten. Fear and adrenaline coursed through Angelo's veins as he struggled to keep his head above water, the dark depths threatening to swallow him whole. As Angelo and his wife flailed in the water, disoriented and terrified, strong arms suddenly reached out and grabbed them from below, yanking them downward. Angelo held his breath, and a few seconds later, as his ears burned from the sudden change in depth, he felt something plastic being shoved into his mouth in the darkness. He fought it for a split second before realizing what it was. Angelo drew a sharp breath from the scuba regulator. In front of him, he recognized Sam and Tom. They must have been wearing scuba gear and clinging to the underside of the gondola the whole time. Sam positioned his hands on the back of a sea scooter. He could barely see in the murky water, but slowly all four of them came together, and Angelo breathed with the relief that Julia was with him too. Slowly and together, all four of them made their way out of the ancient canal. It was slow-moving and seemed to go forever. He wondered how Sam and Tom were even navigating in such murky conditions, but they appeared to be comfortable doing so. A moment later, they surfaced on the loading dock of a boutique hotel. Angelo kissed his wife, thanked Sam and Tom. Sam said, "I'm glad you're both okay. That's the main thing. It's a bummer about the $2 million, but a worthwhile exchange, I think." Beaming, Angelo removed his backpack. "I forgot," he chuckled. "I didn't get a chance to hand this over." Sam opened the bag. Inside was $2 million in 500 euro purple banknotes. Chapter 81. Tarek's eyes ran wild. The water churned. Already the gondolier was righting his boat. Wraiths from beneath the murky waters of the canal had grabbed Angelo and his wife, sucking them under. The bullet-resistant vest and body armor he wore was making him heavy, and he was kicking hard to keep his head above water. The suitcase! Where the fuck did the backpack go? Angelo must have still had it. He saw bubbles floating toward the surface, and instantly pictured Angelo using scuba divers below to dupe him. Tarek considered diving down there after them, but knew that with his heavy body armor he would never reach the surface again. He pointed the pistol down toward the bubbles and squeezed the trigger, firing multiple times until he emptied the chamber. The shots were slowed by the water, and the rounds sank aimlessly to the seabed far below. Tarek clambered onto the gondola. A moment later, the sound of bullets ripped across the water. Someone had managed to follow him. They were taking shots at him from a distant building. The gondolier swore and leaped back into the water. Tarek climbed through an open window into a room he'd hired at the hotel, specifically in case Angelo tried to double-cross him. He loaded another magazine into his pistol. Then he stepped out of the hotel. Tarek ran south, crossing the bridge opposite the historic home of the famous explorer Marco Polo, before bursting through the doors of the Chiesa del Santissimo Redentore. He slowed his breathing and walked down the empty pews of the 16th century Roman Catholic Church. As a pilgrimage church, the building was expected to have a long nave, which was something of a challenge for the Italian Renaissance architect Palladio, with his commitment to classical architecture. This resulted in a somewhat eclectic building, with a white stucco and gray stone interior and Corinthian columns. At the end of the pews, he reached the nave. A priest greeted him in Italian. "Bless you, my son." "Forgive me, father, for I have sinned," Tarek replied. "I must beg you to provide sanctuary." The priest nodded, and with his opened left hand, he gestured toward a private chamber behind the chancel. Tarek followed him through the gateway, behind a curtain, and descended a series of stone steps beneath the church. "You may take refuge here, my son." "Thank you." Tarek turned to face the priest, and was stunned to see the ordained minister was holding a weapon and pointing it at him. He noted the gun was a Beretta PX-4 Storm, an easy-to-conceal semi-automatic pistol. Tarek's face fell. He held his hands up in front of him. "What is the meaning of this?" The priest suppressed a frown. "The relic hunter is very disappointed with your efforts." Tarek reached for his pistol. The false priest-assassin squeezed the trigger twice, putting 2 shots in Tarek's head. Chapter 82. Marco Polo Airport. The private jet soared into the sky. Sam unclipped his belt to move about the luxurious cabin before turning in for some much-needed rest. Amira had opened a book. It was an old science fiction classic called Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. She appeared lost in it already, and Sam was happy for her, and envied her chance to read the book for the first time. The woman was due for some pure escapism. He had officially hired her as a consultant to help him find the third golem, but soon enough they would need to work out what to do about her visa situation. Once Amira settled on a plan of action, he felt confident that Elise would have some ideas of how to deal with it. Amira would make decisions for herself about where and how she wanted to live. Sam glanced at Tom, who was already drifting off to sleep, his hands entangled with Genevieve's. It had been a long time apart, as well as a long 21 days of pure hell. Angelo and his wife Julia were sitting next to each other, still wide awake, their faces awash with relief. Sam's father James was talking animatedly with them. He was apologizing for the fact that he'd somehow missed his shots, and that Tarek had managed to get away through a hotel window. He'd been using a sniper rifle to track them from the roof on the next island across, but the shot was just out of his reach, despite his best efforts. James promised that he would put a bounty on the man's head. He would personally make sure that Tarek would no longer be a threat to them. James stood up. On his way to the restroom, he exchanged a glance with his son. Picking up this morning's paper, he handed it to him. "I thought you might want to see this. Look on page 3. "Okay, thanks," Sam said, wondering who read the news on a piece of paper these days, and more importantly, how did his father get a hold of an English paper in Venice? Sam sat down and opened it. It had a picture of a small Sudanese boy named Bakit holding an ancient Egyptian yusk. The boy and his father had donated it to the Sudan National Museum, and it was currently being prepared for a global tour promoting the ancient pyramids of Meroe and the Kushite kingdom. The tour was named in honor of Xavier Griffiths, in recognition of the late professor of archaeology. He had spent years exploring the Sudan and was dedicated to the ancient civilization. There was a note that the small boy had picked up a 7-figure book deal to tell his real-life story of survival and how he'd been forced to turn to the role of underground miner in the search for ancient treasures to make a living. Sam smiled, pleased that the boy had taken his advice and called a publishing buddy of his. "Good on you, Bakit." A red light flashed, revealing an incoming satellite call. Sam picked it up. "Hello." "Sam Riley," came the familiar voice of Leonardo Legrand, a world-renowned archaeologist. Last Sam had heard, he was the director of archaeology at La Rochelle University, France. "Professor Legrand, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "We need to talk," he replied enigmatically. Sam had only met the man once, and that was years ago at a conference. He was surprised the professor had gone to the trouble of tracking him down. Sam asked, "How did you get this number?" "I like to think I still have my ways." "Interesting. I thought no one had heard from you for years. In fact, I thought there was some talk of you possibly being dead." "Not dead. I fear tales of my poor health are greatly exaggerated." Sam asked, "How are you now?" "I'm not too well, if I were to be honest." "Why?" "I found something extraordinary." "So what's the problem?" "I'm afraid this discovery is going to get me killed." "Why?" "The same reason anyone might want to kill you. To protect one's secrets." Sam drew a breath. "What's the secret?" "It has to do with King Midas, and how he turned everything he touched to gold." "King Midas was a myth, nothing more." "That's where you're wrong. Midas existed, and despite what you may believe, most of the legend is true. What's more, I can prove it." That got Sam's attention. This sounded like a conspiracy theorist on the internet, but the professor was no fool. He was an expert archaeologist. If he said Midas existed, then Sam wanted to listen to what he had to say. "Okay," Sam said. "You've got my attention." "How?" "Not over the phone. Can we meet?" "Sure. When and where?" "As soon as you can. You're the only person I can trust to keep me safe until the secret is out. Come. I will tell you everything. Where I have been these past 6 years, and what I have discovered." Sam's eyes narrowed. "Why me?" "I need an expert cave diver to reach it." That explained why the professor had sought him out specifically. "And what exactly is it that you found?" The professor exhaled reverently. "The location Of the Midas Vault. Sam drew a breath. He was particularly interested now. Look, I've got to drop some people back to Naples, but then we can fly out for a visit. Great. Call me when you get to Paris. I'll text you a location where we can meet in private. Okay, look forward to it. Sam ended the call. The sat phone lit up red again. He picked it up. Professor Legrand. No, came another man's voice, one he didn't recognize. I'm from the Mexican Cave Rescue Association. There's been an accident at the Chevet Cave, and we need your help. Sam listened for a few minutes, and then agreed to come right away. When he hung up, he walked to the back of the aircraft where his friend was seated. Tom lifted his eyes, rolled over, and sat upright. What is it? Apparently, we're not the only ones searching for the Midas Vault. You astonish me. Others are looking for the lost treasure, where King Midas stored his unlimited supply of gold? Sam chuckled. A professor of archaeology from France just called me to tell me he's found it. Says he'll give me the exact location when I see him in person. Cool. So, Paris. Is that where we're headed? Not yet. Why? Sam's mouth was set with determination. There's been a cave diving accident in Chevet Cave, so we're heading to Mexico. Tom swore. What's happening there? A team of explorers have gone missing. Tom said, They don't have a local rescue team for that. Not for this sort of thing. Why not? Tom asked. I'm happy to help, but let's face it, we're a long way away from Mexico. Surely someone closer can do the job. The team were roughly 5,000 feet below ground when they entered a series of water-filled sumps. Tom whistled. The Chevet Cave, the deepest known cave dive in the world. Sam nodded. And that's why we've been asked to literally jump in. There aren't many people in the world who have ever dived to those depths. A grim look crossed Tom's face. I hate to say it, but it sounds like a body retrieval. Maybe not, Sam said, non-committally. Really? According to the director of the expedition, one of the divers sent a message to the surface through a bottle. A note in a bottle? It was a rudimentary, yet evidently effective way of passing data between the vertical sumps. Okay, Tom said, drawing the word out. And what did the message say? Sam shook his head, unsure what to make of it. It says their team were attacked by a green wraith, and they've scattered in all directions to flee it. Right, Tom grinned. So we're off to the Chevet to chase a green wraith that lives 5,000 feet underground. Nodding, Sam smiled. Yeah, and after that we're going to find the Midas Vault. Of course we are. So, are you in? Sam asked. Tom just leaned back in his comfortable leather seat and laughed. Chapter 83. The Gulfstream G650 had a secret cargo compartment. It wasn't very large, only part of the length of the fuselage, and access to it was reserved to an equally well-hidden hatchway from inside the cabin. Surrounded by plush Napa leather and luxurious fittings, the entrance was concealed by a small, rich oak and mahogany table. The table could be moved by pressing two buttons on the wall of the fuselage that triggered an electronic actuator to shift to the side. Once removed, the carpet below the table could be retracted to reveal the entirely masked opening. The smuggler's hold was a leftover from the previous owners, who had used the jet to run illegal contraband. The mob boss was currently serving double life sentences for drug smuggling, along with extortion and murder charges. It wasn't exactly a vote of confidence for its ability to maintain secrecy. Lying supine in this hold, and firmly secured with aircraft tie-downs, firmly ratcheted in close, was a golem, made almost entirely of one of the rarest metals on Earth, orichalcum, which was mined by the people of Atlantis many millennia ago. The normally red-golden shine was reduced to a dull gloss in the near darkness of its concealed confines. Sam had retrieved the artifact from the Verda MSC, which was docked in Port Gioia Toro, Italy. The golem had been found by his late friend, Professor Xavier Griffiths, who had located the strange archaeological creature buried in China. The anthropomorphic metallic golem had a solid face with 2 deep indents for eyes and a small, savage mouth. Tiny ears adorned its big, bald head, which was jammed on top of 2 bowling ball-sized shoulders, housed on a massive frame weighing precisely 7 tons. Its metallic body had turned icy cold in the unpressurized hold. The aircraft hit a pocket of turbulence. Its pilots banked to the left, setting a course due west, and began to climb, navigating the jet through the gaps in the rough weather like someone might thread a needle. The aircraft settled into straight and level flight, its long, sleek cabin perfectly stable once more. Suddenly, the golem's eyes opened. They began to glow an eerie green as the ancient beast stirred to life. The end. This has been Skeleton Crew, Sam Riley, Book 27. Written by Christopher Cartwright. Narrated by David Gilmour. Copyright 2023 by Christopher Cartwright. Production copyright 2023 by Christopher Cartwright. This is David Gilmour. Thank you for listening.